Braddon, which may well be lost to Labor, and the seat of Bass, which is also seriously in doubt. Anthony, can we look at Braddon?
Well, Sid Sidebottom won this in 1998. He's a former history and religion teacher at Don College. At this stage, he's running second behind Mark Baker, who's a local businessman from Devonport. If you look at that, the percentages there, you can see the Liberal votes on 50.1%, Labor 40%. The Greens, this has always been their weakest electorate in Tasmania. When we factor in the preferences and the boos, it's translating into a 6.9% swing, which has the Liberal Party leading, which is mean the computer's getting close to giving it away. It's not quite given it away yet. And the great concern in trying to predict this seat is we've got 46 of the 74 booths, but we've actually only got 40% counted. There's a lot of bigger booths to come, so that's why we're being a bit cautious at this stage. OK, now the seat of Lyons, which has been held fairly comfortably by Dick Adams with 8.2%, there's been something of a swing away from him. But he's going to hold the seat by the looks of it. On the raw primary votes there, he's just a smidgen behind the Liberal candidate Ben Quinn. If you look at the percentages there, you can see they're neck and neck, the Greens on about 9%. But we know the boos this information is from, and when you factor in those boos, the swing is only 4.6%. So in fact, Dick Adams looks like he will go on to hold that seat if that swing continues through the rest of the boos in that electorate. OK, now the other trouble seat for Labor in Tasmania, the seat of Bass, which Michelle O'Byrne holds by a mere 2.1%. Well, this number is jumping backwards and forwards at the moment, and when you see the swing jump backwards and forwards, it's usually a sign that there's a bit of doubt in the figure. The Liberals are on 49.8. When we look at the booths and the preferences, and we've got a preference count in 18 of the 50 booths, it's showing a 4.9%, which would be the first Liberal gain for the night. But when I looked 2 minutes ago, the swing there was 2.5%, so it really has bounced around a lot.
We're going to cross to Michelle O'Byrne now, who is with supporters right in the heart of Launceston. Michelle, do you think at this stage, in fact, you look as if you are suffering some of the expected backlash from Mark Latham's forest policy?
Oh, what I think, Maxine, is I'm dealing with what I've dealt with the last two elections, which is a fair bit of movement early in the night and no real outcome at this stage. We've got a few larger booths to come in, which might determine the outcome. And as in 98, I'm used to those long counts, so let's just see how it plays.
Yes, in fact, what was it, 78 votes you won by, and what was it, 98?
In 98, I won by 78 votes. It was 10 days of counting, so I'm ready to hang on a little bit longer before I make a decision about how this one's gone.
What's giving you reason to be confident at this stage, though? I mean, you did have the Prime Minister in the heart of Launceston this week announcing his rival forest policy, which was clearly a lot more popular with timber workers.
Well, I guess it was more popular given he told them one thing and told the rest of the Australia through the media something else. But I think what has made me positive is there has been a good reaction on the street, and I really would like to see how the larger booths go. And having been through these fights before, Maxine, I've waited 10 days past the election to get the result. I'll wait a little bit longer tonight before I make my call. I understand that. Have you talked to any of your other colleagues, I'm wondering, around the rest of the state, particularly, say, to Sid Sidebottom in Braddon? We've spoken throughout the day, and I think all of us at the moment are just trying to have a bit of a look at what's happening with the results, spend a bit of time with those people who've worked really hard for us, and we'll see out the rest of the night. We'd be interested to see what happens when we get the results around the rest of Australia. So it's a bit of wait and see. In terms of the past week, Michelle O'Byrne, in terms of the Tasmanian coverage of the forest issue compared with other issues, give me your sense of how you feel this big issue of the forests obviously played compared with many of the other messages that the ALP was trying to get out. I guess it has played largely, mainly because I think of the media coverage, not so much of the immediate reaction from people, but so has the issue of health and so has the issue of education. We've had 1 week on forestry, we've had 6 weeks of people saying that they want to get their health issues sorted. So these issues are all competing. We'll see how it goes. I really can't call it yet, Maxine. All right. We'll see how this progresses through the evening. Michelle O'Byrne for that. Thanks very much at the moment. Thank you. Bye-bye. Well, for the many viewers just joining us, and particularly to everyone watching us through Asia and the Pacific on our satellite service, welcome to Australia Votes 2004. And already, as we've noted, there are 2 Labor seats in Tasmania in trouble. Before we plunge into a night of swings and roundabouts in the marginal seats around Australia, let's run through our key graphics that are going to help you understand the unfolding picture tonight, starting with what we call the chamber graphic, and the distribution of seats in the old House of Representatives, which we'll update through the night. The coalition, represented there by the blue and green figures, has a total of 83 seats out of 150. Labor in the red has 63 seats. The Greens have 1,
and there are 3 independents. The magic number in the lower house is 76. That's the number of seats needed to govern without the support of independents. We also have a scoreboard graphic, which we'll use every half hour or so to summarise the state of the parties. This graphic shows the primary vote of all candidate groups currently. For instance, it shows a combined Liberal National Party primary vote of 48%, which is ominous for Labor, although these are pretty much Tasmanian figures at this stage. The Labor Party shows a primary vote of 35.6. I think you could expect that to go up as the mainland figures start to come in. The Green vote around 6.8%. There's also the national trend graphic, another key graphic, which would show the national trends around Australia, but of course at the moment these again would mostly reflect Tasmanian figures, and they're showing that swing of around 5% to the Liberal Party, but a loss to Labor of around 2.2, probably more really. Anthony Green, when do you think we're going to start seeing the mainland seats actually mean anything?
Oh, look, at this stage we get 0.1, 0.2 from individual mainland seats, and it's just really not worth looking at them. In the next 10 minutes we start to get votes above 1%, and then we start to really talk about mainland figures. OK, Nick Minchin, on what you've absorbed in this first half hour or so. You are smiling, aren't you?
Well, Labor's struggling to hold on to 2 seats in Tasmania at the very start of the election night. And if they were to lose those 2, then they've got to win 15 on the mainland to have any hope of forming a majority. So this means Labor's in a real struggle here. On these figures, I'd say we're going to win at least one of these Tasmanian seats. So Labor's got to win 14.
More likely Braddon than Bass, you would think.
Well, they're bouncing around. The latest figures, Bass was better than Braddon, but Braddon is certainly looking strong, possibly Bass, which then makes Labor's task all that much more difficult on the mainland to win a majority of seats. And I must say, at this early stage, I find it very difficult to see how Labor can win a majority of seats at this election.
Because, of course, they start from a standing start. They've got to pick up 13 seats,
right.
And with every seat they lose, there's just that many more they have to find somewhere else. Bob McMullen, that's true, isn't it? Each one you lose.
Arithmetic's just arithmetic. That doesn't actually advance the cause of science, public information very much. If the same factors which are causing us damage in Tasmania have been a positive for us on the mainland, that enhances our capacity to win more seats. We'll all know that soon. I mean, in what might be an indication of what's going to happen on the mainland, there's just been a booth in Launceston that swung to us. So, I mean, the pattern is very variable at the moment in Tasmania. Clearly, you'd expect the smaller places, which are much more influenced by the timber industry, to be hard for us, and the bigger places where there's more diverse culture to be more representative. And so there are booths where we're getting swings to us, booths where we're getting swings against us, and it's a hard battle for both Michelle O'Byrne and Sid Sidebottom, which is a real tragedy because they've both been terrific members of Parliament, but let's hope they get back.
But it sounds like you might have been prepared to sacrifice them for better figures on the mainland. In other words, for a bigger return on the mainland.
No, absolutely not. Nobody would ever... I mean, Sid Sidebottom's one of my closest mates, so the chance that I'd sit around and say, I'm going to give Sid away there is just impossible. What you've got to do is work out what the good policy is and then argue for it. And that was our position, that remains our position, it will be our position.
OK, we'll keep looking at seats, and we might start introducing some of the mainland seats now, with the seat of Page in regional New South Wales, held by Ian Causley narrowly for the National Party on 2.8%.
Well, Page is a seat that Harry Wood used to hold for the Labor Party from 90 to 96, the only time Labor's ever held the seat. But they've managed to... It's probably the most marginal of the rural seats in the country, and Ian Causley is currently ahead on the primary votes there, as you can see. We've actually got preference counts in 2 of the 82 booths, and it's indicating that there's actually a swing of 3.7% to Causley at the moment, but they're very early figures, only 2 of the 82 booths. I wouldn't sort of get excited about that.
OK, now, the seat of Richmond was always going to be one of the interesting seats tonight, certainly one that Labor strategists always mentioned in the first 1 or 2 when you talked about New South Wales. This is held by Larry Anthony, a minister in the Howard government, held for the National Party on a margin of 1.7%.
Well, we've got a couple of booths here like Main Arm Upper, and they're a sort of solid green booths, which is why you've got 26% of the vote with the Greens. Yes. On the booths we've got, you're seeing that's actually translating into a 8% swing to the Labor Party. and it's listed as an ALP gain there. That's a bit precipitous, to be honest. You've got a couple of the alternative lifestyle communities reporting their booths there, and I don't think the Liberal Party even bothered, the National Party even bothered to campaign in some of those areas.
OK, now what about the seat of Gilmore on the New South Wales south coast, held by Joanna Gash for the Liberal Party?
Well, this saw the biggest swing to the Labor Party, to the Liberal Party in the country at the last election. The Labor Party had a bit of a problem, a candidate factor, which worked against them heavily in that electorate, resulting in a 10% swing. At this stage, Joanna Gash is holding up. We've only got 3 of the 60 booths, so again, these are quite early figures. We're just giving you a sample of what's going on. It's indicating a 0.2% swing to the Labor Party, but to be quite honest, I wouldn't, again, hold too much faith in that being the final result.
OK, now one of our independents here in the seat of Calare, Peter Andren, based around Bathurst and Orange in regional New South Wales.
Well, I don't think anybody's surprised to see that Peter Andren is leading on the primary votes. It would be amazing if he wasn't. He's well ahead at this stage on 791. That translates into 49% of the vote. And we're estimating after preferences, it'll be a rather complex count to decide who's determined here. But at this stage, it looks like he'll hold the seat, no problems at all. Big swing to the National Party, though.
OK.
The one state in the country that is still voting, that of course is WA, Western Australia, and of course it's just after 4:30 in the afternoon there. We're crossing now to, in fact, the ABC's political correspondent in the West, Peter Kennedy. Peter, you're obviously there in front of one of the still open polling booths. Give us a sense of how you feel the campaign has gone in the West, just in the last couple of days, this final week of a very long campaign.
Well, it certainly has been a long campaign. But Maxine, the Liberal Party has run a very well-funded and very aggressive campaign in the West. There's been a big swing of senior ministers campaigning in marginal seats, and a very, as I say, well-funded campaign by the Liberals. Labor, more low-key. Labor holds 7 of the state's 15 federal seats, and I think the Labor Party would be very happy if they held on to those 7 seats tonight, and the Liberals would be very keen to win at 1 or 2 marginals to boost their numbers. But as I say, a very aggressive campaign by the Liberal Party, with Paul Everingham Jr., the state director of the Liberal Party, running his first campaign here.
Peter, in terms of likely Liberal gains, would a seat like, say, Hasluck in metropolitan Perth, is that perhaps one of the interesting ones to watch tonight?
It certainly would be. I spoke to a Liberal senator a short time ago. He was very confident that the Liberals would make gains, and he indicated that Hasluck, which at the moment is held by Sharon Jackson for the Labor Party, he thought that Hasluck would probably be the first cab off the rank if seats were to change hands. He also indicated that perhaps the seat of Stirling, which is held by Labor's Jan McFarlane, might be next. A swing of 1.6 in Stirling would see that change hands. And if there was a big move on for the Liberal Party in the West, the seat of Swan would be vulnerable as well. That's held for Labor by Kim Wilkie by a margin of 2%.
All right. Peter Kennedy, thanks for that at this stage. We'll leave you there, perhaps come back later in the evening. Stephen Smith, if I can come to you on that. You heard what Peter said there. I mean, unusually for you, of course, on the other side of the continent tonight. What do you think of Hasluck? Is that the one that Labor is most worried about, as Peter said there?
Maxine, the first thing I have to say is it's just gone 4:30 in Perth. Anyone who hasn't voted should think of Peter Costello and vote. That's my first point.
That having been said.
Having got that off my chest, I've always thought in Perth that with a bit of luck it'd be a score draw. We'd hang on to what we've got and they'd hang on to what they've got. The two I've been worried about variously through the campaign have been Stirling and Hasluck, and they're the two to watch. It's true, though, that 2 to 3 weeks ago, our research was showing us in severe trouble in the West. And we looked like we were in trouble in all of those marginal seats, including Cowan. So
what were the main factors there?
Well, the main factors were, firstly, it's an outlying state, so it's hard to get the national issues up from opposition. But it's one of Howard's strongest states. The national security issues always resonate there. And on this occasion, Mark was the leader rather than Kim, who was a hometown boy last time, and that always has an effect in an outlying state like WA.
In fact, I mean, is one of the, if you don't do well tonight in Perth, in WA, will it come down to the fact that Mark Latham is still probably a lesser-known quantity there?
Well, I think it's more complicated than that, but also I think we ran home very strongly in the West. I'm actually confident that we'll hang on to all our seats, but 2 or 3 weeks ago we were in danger of losing Stirling and Hasluck, Cowan, Swan, So we're in danger of losing the classic metropolitan marginals. I think with a bit of luck it'll be a score draw. I think in Stirling we've just gone through the Tasmanian aspect. Stirling, perversely, our forest policy will help us in a seat like Stirling. And in Hasluck, as we have in Stirling, we've got a good, strong local member. I think in the end the Libs will find it hard to take either of those seats off us.
So best result status quo, but no gains.
I gave up thinking about gains in Perth when we had two tragedies with candidates. In Kalgoorlie, the late demise and tragic death of our candidate, and when Jane Garrick passed away at Christmas, to me that was the end realistically of our hopes in Canning.
Okay. Stephen, we'll leave it there for the moment.
Thanks.
Kerry.
And there's absolutely no doubt when you look at the updated figures in Tasmania, 65% of the vote counted in the seat of Braddon, more than 50% of the vote counted in the seat of Bass. Those were the two seats that were always going to be most affected by the old-growth forest issue. In the seat of Braddon, 7.1% against. In the seat of Bass, another strong swing. Anthony, can we just look at the overview of all 5 seats, because that tells the story of Tasmania?
Well, what we're seeing at this stage is it's increasingly looking like the Labor Party has lost both Bass and Braddon. We've now got over 50% in Bass and 60% in Braddon counted, and it looks like at this stage that both of those seats will be lost unless there's some really big booths which can turn it around. But Labor will retain Denison with a small swing, Franklin with a small swing, and in Lyons, Dick Adams is at his swing as his margin halved, but he will still retain the seat.
OK, can we look again at some of the mainland seats? And the seat of Eden Monaro and regional New South Wales, east of Canberra to the coast, held by Gary Nairn with a margin of, I think, just a little over 2% or just under 2%.
Well, this is a good sign of one of those seats which is always tough to call on the first booths, but on the first booths you see the Liberals are well ahead. There's quite a vote there for the Greens, who've got 16% at this stage, neck and neck on the primaries. We've got a preference count in 7 to the 7 of the 72 booths, which is indicating a 3.8% swing. At this stage, Labor's ahead in Eden Monaro, and from my memory of every election I've ever done, Eden Monaro has tended to bounce backwards and forwards for about the first half of the night.
The significant thing about Eden Monaro is the best booths for us are the last ones.
OK. We might take a look at obviously these, we're going to be coming back and forwards around these seats for quite a while now, but the seat of Brisbane, which is a Labor-held marginal, held by Arch Bevis, with a margin of just 1%. Anthony?
Well, this is the seat where Arch Bevis had his margin cut from over 3% to about 1%. He's up against Ingrid Tall, who's well known as the head of the local AMA. She's not receiving family first preferences, and at this stage Labor's ahead on 45.3%, and we are looking at this stage on just 2 booths, it must be said, a 2.4% swing to Labor.
OK, now the seat of Maranoa in the southern outback, Bruce Scott, the sitting National, with a very large margin of 15.4%.
Yeah, not a seat we often see this early in the night, but Bruce Scott there, romping ahead at this stage. He's got 73% of the vote, and we can actually look at just to factor in the booths to see what sort of swing that looks like. Actually,
you can talk about that.
4.1% swing to Bruce Scott, but I'm not sure that's very indicative of other more marginal seats.
OK, now we might just break from the seats for a second. Bob McMullen has got some scrutineer feedback in Eden Monaro, which is the Liberal-held seat, margin of 1.7%. It was a seat that Labor's been targeting. What are the scrutineers saying?
It's consistent with what the screen's saying, but it's very good to get it from the ground. 5 early booths in Eden Monaro, a swing of about 3% to us in those booths. So that's...
What sort of booths are they?
If they're small, they're country town booths. I have to say, I can't tell you the names of the booths. It was a rather hasty call. But it wouldn't be Queanbeyan, right? That wouldn't be in the early booths. It would be the smaller regional... Eden Monaro is essentially 3 things. There's Queanbeyan, there's the coast, and there's the strip in between. It'll be some of the smaller towns in that central strip, which is not normally the area that you'd expect to be strongest for us in this election.
Any early pangs on that one, Nick?
This is Bob trying to be optimistic, and that's fair enough, but we're talking about 1.5% of the count.
Yeah.
There are some green parts. This is one of the most diverse seats in the country,
Yes,
so I don't think anybody should get too excited.
What Nick says is true.
Yeah. OK, the seat of Capricornia now in Rockhampton and central Queensland. This seat held by Kirsten Livermore for the Labor Party with a margin of 5.5%.
Well, she's behind at this stage, but this is a rather peculiar, definitely rather peculiar election, because it's got a lot of small rural towns. It's got Rockhampton, and it's got some big mining towns. So the first figures always favour the National Party, as you see there. And at this stage, they look as though they're well ahead, especially when there's a Liberal there as well. But when we factor in the booths that information is from, it's a slightly closer picture. There is a swing to the National Party in those rural booths, but the Labor Party is still ahead at this stage.
OK, the seat of Cunningham, this has some interest. This is based in the Illawarra around Wollongong. It's actually held by the Greens. They picked it up in a by-election where there was great disaffection with the Labor candidate at that time, but it's expected to come back to Labor. Anthony?
Yeah, well, we'll actually look at the change of vote graph on this one when we do it, rather than two-party preferred, because it doesn't make sense. But as you can see there, the Liberals are running third, and that's a problem for Labor because they'll be directing preferences to the Greens if that continues. But let's just look at the change in vote there, and you can see there's been a big shift to the Greens. The Democrats and the others from the last federal election have been wiped out, and Michael Organ has definitely built base of support. I'm not prepared to give that away because our computer was actually getting close to that, but we've only got one preference count in one booth, so at this stage there's a way to go in Cunningham.
I've been joined now by the ABC's political correspondent in Canberra for the 7:30 report, Michael Brissenden. Michael, I gather you've been looking at a bit of a summary of just where we're at and just how substantial the Green vote is around the place.
Well, I think the story for tonight, one of the big stories tonight, is going to be the Green vote. And of course in Tasmania, which is where we've got most of our results, the big feature at the moment is the swing to the Liberals. But if anything's going to save Labor in any of these seats, it's going to be the Green vote. And Tasmania and the Green vote have a sort of symbiotic relationship. Many people will remember that back in 1990, Graham Richardson devised the Green strategy that got the Hawke government over the line with only 37% of the primary vote back then. So if we go back to that, we can see that the Green vote in the House of Reps at least was 2.2. It went up in 93, down again in 96, down a bit to 5.6 in 98, back up to 7.8 last time. That's nationally. So overall, I think the Green vote is expected to be about 10% nationally. Already in Tasmania, it's sitting at about 9.6%. So if it's 9.6% in Tasmania with all of the stuff that's gone on there over the forests in the last week or so, we could expect it to be a bit more than 10%, I suspect.
I gather in some seats, and it's a seat like Richmond, Larry Anthony's seat, the Greens are talking about a plus 20% vote at this stage. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
But I mean, this is going to be one of the big areas where this whole sort of sea change effect is going to have the changing demographic in places like Richmond is going to be very important, and obviously that's a big Green area. It has been for some time, but I think more and more as time goes on, and we're seeing that certainly this time.
So do you think part of the story might be tonight that in fact Labor's gamble on the forest policy in Tasmania, that it would cost seats there but would pay big dividends elsewhere, I mean, might look like paying off?
Well, that's clearly what, obviously, the gamble that was made. I mean, but, if we look at the seats in Tasmania now, I mean, as we've been saying, I mean, some of them are, it looks like, for instance, in Bass, Michelle O'Byrne, as she was saying, looks like she doesn't know yet, it's still too early to call. Braddon, they'll probably lose that. But, I mean, Michelle O'Byrne is a very effective local campaigner. I followed her when she first got the seat in 98, and I agree with her. I wouldn't be giving it away if I was her just yet. And somewhere like Lyons, where Dick Adams has made such a fuss over this issue, that may well save him there. So I don't know, maybe the gamble, in a sense, has had less impact than they thought in Tasmania and may have a bigger impact on the mainland.
Oh, we'll see. Thanks, Michael. Kerry?
Thanks, Maxine. And I think looking at that, the bottom of frame information, Anthony, I think you're a little bit concerned that it might be giving a false impression at this stage.
Yeah, I'm just concerned there might be a bit of a Don's Party effect going out there on people watching. The first figures come from the country, and as soon as we've got figures in the computer, our computer will start to give away seats. So that's why the coalition's racing ahead to 49. We're quite happy with that 49 figure. We're also quite happy with that 20 figure for Labor. But the one thing I would warn, there's a lot of city seats that actually haven't given us any figures yet. So if there's any Labor people out there slashing their wrists, or coalition members out there sort of having a huge party because I think they're heading for a landslide.
Just throttle back slightly.
Just throttle back slightly. We don't want the sort of Don's Party affairs turning up later in the evening.
And in fact, some of those early figures are suggesting that the seats are going to be all over the place in the early stages. Nick, mention just pausing for one moment and trying to nail the issues that you think have worked best for you. And I know that in some areas it's different issues to others, but across the board, what are the key issues that have bitten for you?
Oh, obviously our record on the economy. I mean, people do give us high marks for managing the economy well. I think the interest rates issue has bitten against Labor, and I think at the end of the day, people are just finding it difficult to make the jump to Mark Latham. So leadership in the economy are the things that have really worked for us, I think, through the campaign. I think we got that. I think the fact that Labor had to come back onto those issues in the last week suggests to me Labor was seeing those issues bite. They had to come onto our turf. That was a major strategic retreat for them. And I think those are the issues that will get us over the line tonight.
And I think the feedback that you've had around polling booths around Australia today have suggested in a number of places that there is some real anger against the government, against John Howard.
Yeah, look, I think it has been fairly polarised. I was on a booth for a few hours and I've rung around. A lot of queues, a lot of emotion both ways. I think a lot of people desperate not to see Mark Latham become Prime Minister, but equally I have to accept after 8.5 years, as the Prime Minister said, having made a lot of tough decisions, you build up some antipathy.
Bob McMullen, very briefly, the key issues that you think have bitten for you as opposed to those that have worked against you.
Oh, it's pretty clear that there's a broad pattern of strength on health and education, and a strong feeling that there's a sense of lack of trust in the government and a lack of respect for its integrity, and those two things have combined to convince a lot of people it's time to change. The question is whether it's enough, and no one knows that.
All right, well, we'll keep going with the seats. We've got the seat of Parramatta, another one of those extremely interesting seats held for the Liberal Party by Ross Cameron. But we all know the controversy that surrounded Ross Cameron going into this campaign. Anthony?
Well, Ross Cameron's been a highly, one of the most active sitting members. He's held a very marginal seat. It's a really tough seat to hold for any sitting member. Crosses the social divide of Sydney. Julie Owens is ahead at this stage. There's a Winston Hills booth and 2 Harris Park booths at this stage, which have Labor ahead on 45.9 to 40. Not a high vote for the Greens. You get less of this minor party vote in these some of the marginal seats. You get squeezed out. There's a 1.2% swing to the Liberal Party. I've got some other figures which indicate a 1.5% swing to the Labor Party in the same seat. So I think there's a bit of up and down going on in the figures as they come in. We get an update about once every minute.
OK, another interesting seat in Western Sydney, the seat of Greenway, which was held by Labor. It has 2 new candidates contesting there, and it was one seat where Labor in the last few days was starting to express real concern.
Yes, well, I don't think we've really got much of interest in the very small figures in Greenway. So we'll just point out that Louise Marcus, this is a seat where there's no sitting Labor member. Ed Husick's trying to sort of succeed Frank Mossfield, and at this stage, that's a very early count, so I think it's probably worthwhile leaving there.
Now, one of the extremely high-interest seats of this campaign, of course, the seat of Wentworth in Sydney, where the former sitting Liberal is now standing as an independent against the very high-profile Malcolm Turnbull, who is the Liberal Party candidate. Maxine, I think Peter King is standing by.
That's right, Kerry. In fact, we cross now to Peter King in the heart of Wentworth. Peter, I know talking to any number of residents in Wentworth in your area over the last couple of weeks, you could just get a bet on any one of you, on you winning the seat, the scenarios about Malcolm Turnbull, even scenarios that Labor's David Patch would get up. How are you feeling at this stage?
Well, firstly, I've got to apologise for my voice because I'm all spruiked out. Secondly, I am intrigued that this seat has been the most bet upon seat in the country. Well, what I can say to you is this. We've had an absolutely fantastic response from my supporters today. We've had every booth manned perfectly. We've had wonderful enthusiasm from those supporters. I think that of itself is going to be sending a message to the Liberal Party and any other political party that tries to do what's happening here again, that you cannot take your own seats for granted and you cannot take your members for granted. So I'm very pleased with the message already that's been sent from the superb performance by my supporters today.
But in fact, what are your party workers telling you at this stage? 55 minutes after polling booths have closed?
Well, we haven't actually got any decent reports at all, although we've had some positive reports from the southern part of the electorate. But in the strong Liberal areas, the 2 letters from the Prime Minister and the sort of continual attacks on me as sort of somehow or other not being of true Liberal values, I think has had some effect. However, I've been very pleased with the overall response on the booths as I've gone around them today.
I did hear from one source a couple of hours ago that in fact in the last 24 hours you changed your how to vote cards to in fact preference Malcolm Turnbull. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. We handed out the same how to vote card we've handed out the whole time. But what I did do is we had a secondary how to vote on the booths so that people who wanted to vote for Peter King and support the government would be able to do so by preferencing it in a way that I recommended. And I did the same for Green voters and the same for people who wanted to vote for Peter King and support the opposition. So I was consistent on that issue right throughout the campaign.
Nonetheless, you would expect something of a backlash, would you not, from being the candidate who said that initially you would not run as an independent, but in fact then at the last minute chose to do so?
No, that's not right. I never said that at all. That's just part of the campaign against me. I've been utterly consistent all the way along. I served my term as a loyal Liberal. I stood when the opportunity arose just 5 weeks ago, and in 5 weeks I put together a fantastic campaign, and I'm so proud of my supporters. I want to thank every one of them, and I'm very, very pleased to be standing here tonight at the end of what's been a tough but exciting, and I think at the end of the day, a campaign that's going to be good for democracy in this country, because nobody should have to stand down or be walked over. And if they do, I think most Australians think they should stand and fight, and that's what I've done.
Okay. Peter King, for stretching your voice that much further, thanks very much. We'll follow Wentworth with great interest throughout the evening.
Thank you.
And on the set with me now, in fact, I've been joined by the Green Senator for New South Wales, Senator Kerry Nettle. Now, in fact, Senator, what are you hearing about the Greens vote at this stage? You heard what Michael Brissenden had to say about 5 minutes ago. What reports are you getting?
Well, it certainly was a great day on the booths today. The response from people taking harder votes and being interested in the Greens, particularly in the Senate, was fantastic. And throughout the campaign, we've had that response, particularly in regional areas where perhaps we haven't traditionally gone as well in the past. The response has been fantastic, so I'm waiting to see those votes to come in, see whether it translates to an increased vote in rural parts of this country as well.
I gather you're getting some pretty spectacular results early on, admittedly, but in a seat like Richmond, held by Larry Anthony in northern New South Wales.
Yeah, I'm not sure what percentage of the vote we're looking at counted so far in Richmond, but what we had from those initial figures was that 25% of the vote was going to the Greens. Now, this is a really marginal seat that the Nationals only hold by 1.6%. So that 25% vote for the Greens, where we are preferencing the Labor candidate, would bring the Labor candidate in there on a margin of 6%. Now, this is a minister who's got quite a high profile, part of the family dynasty in that area, and yet this significant Greens vote may well mean and make the difference to that marginal seat then going to the Labor Party.
And just finally, I gather you are somewhat unhappy about the kind of campaign that in fact Larry Anthony's team ran against the Greens.
Yeah, Larry Anthony letterboxed the electorate with a brochure that was copying the Greens logo and was saying the Greens think that you should preference Larry Anthony, not the Labor Party, which was not our decision. And yet, even still, we are seeing 25% vote for the Greens there, and it could well bring the Labor candidate in Richmond.
Okay. Kerry?
Thanks, Maxine. I'd just like to take 1 minute now to get a sense from our two pros here, Nick Minchin and Bob McMullen, the combination of the figures you've seen so far, Tasmania, mainland, plus your gut instincts. Nick Minchin, where do you think you're placed right now?
Well, quickly, Kerry, with 78% counted in Bass, we're now got a swing to 5.5%, so I think that's gone to the Liberal Party. And we're with 73%, we've got a swing to us at 7.3 in Braddon. So I think Labor looks like losing those two. Therefore, I think it's impossible for Labor to get a majority in this election. But I think the swings on small figures across the mainland are just all over the place at the moment. So I'm not going to call it. My forecast is a narrow coalition victory, but I think it's too early.
Bob McMullen?
Well, I think Bass and Brad are in serious trouble for us. Obviously, I wouldn't give them away. They're my colleagues, but they're in serious trouble. But broadly, the pattern seems to be positive for us on the mainland. It's a bit all over the place, but Parramatta, Richmond, Eden, Monero, the swings are solid to us. A couple of small Conservative booths in Parramatta showing swings of just over 2% to us, two-party preferred. And the figures I gave you before about Eden, Monero. So there's a bit of a pattern going on, big swing to us in the Prime Minister's seat. So there's a number of interesting things going on that suggest that there are enough seats there to be won for us to win. But we've got to win 15 on the mainland, I think.
Well, I think of the Prime Minister's seat, you've got an extraordinary first in Australian political history where a former president of the Prime Minister's party has actively campaigned against him.
Well, that's right, and it seems to be working. There's a...
on the early that's very early days.
No, I'm simply saying it's affecting his vote. I'm not saying I think he's going to lose. I certainly don't think that. But it's certainly affecting the Prime Minister's vote, and Andrew Wilkie's getting over 15% of the vote there.
Kerry, I just noticed a 4.5% count across the country showing a 2.5% swing to the coalition. I mean, what we're seeing is no evidence of a consistent swing to the Labor Party.
The kind of seat that's required.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to be back with more figures very soon, but we're going to cross now to a national news update from Juanita Phillips.
Good evening. While Australians were voting for their government today, the American public had another opportunity to see the two challengers for the White House go head-to-head. George W. Bush and John Kerry clashed over Iraq during their second live TV debate, with the Democratic candidate saying the president had rushed to war.
And if we'd used smart diplomacy, we could have saved $200 billion and an invasion of Iraq, and right now Osama bin Laden might be in jail or dead. That's the war against terror.
For his part, the president accused Senator Kerry of crumbling under political pressure.
You know, for a while he was a strong supporter of getting rid of Saddam Hussein. He saw the wisdom until the Democrat primary came along. And Howard Dean, the anti-war candidate, began to gain on him. And he changed positions.
The third and final debate will be held on Wednesday. In Egypt, the search continues for survivors of this week's bomb blasts, which hit tourist resorts popular with Israelis. The death toll now stands at 29, and another 30 people are still unaccounted for. The dead are believed to be mainly Israeli, as well as at least 5 Egyptians and 1 Russian. More than 120 people were wounded. Israeli officials say they suspect Al-Qaeda was involved. The British government has revealed that it opened secret contacts with the kidnappers of Ken Bigley just days before his murder. 62-year-old Mr. Bigley was taken hostage last month, along with 2 Americans who were both beheaded within days. Mr. Bigley's death came 22 days after his capture.
It's been 3 long weeks of waiting and 3 long weeks of agony.
Philip Bigley said the British government had done all it could to secure his brother's release, but conceded his fate may have been sealed from day one.
I feel utter revulsion at the people that did this. Not just at the barbaric nature of the killing, but the way, frankly, they've played with the situation over the past few weeks.
Special remembrance services have been held in Ken Bigley's home city of Liverpool, which is observing a day of mourning. Kenyan environmentalist Wangari Maathai has been celebrating becoming the first African woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize. The 64-year-old founded the Greenbelt movement, which has planted some 30 million trees around Africa in a campaign to slow deforestation and erosion.
It is unbelievable. It's the kind of thing that you never hear in your life. So I'm very, very overwhelmed and excited, and obviously very flattered.
The prize committee said Mrs. Maathai, who became Kenya's Deputy Environment Minister last year, is an example for all Africans fighting for democracy and peace. Australia is in control of the first test against India, taking quick wickets after setting the home side 457 to win. Damien Martin top-scored in the Australian second innings, while Harbhajan Singh finished with 11 wickets for the match. McGrath, Gillespie and Warne have all taken early wickets in the Indian run chase, but a mix-up between Dravid and Ganguly was the main setback. India at that stage had slumped to 3 for 12. And the weather outlook tomorrow, another fine, dry and sunny day around most of the country. Tops of 23 in Sydney and Canberra, 25 in Melbourne and 26 in Brisbane. The chance of rain in Perth and a top of 22 degrees. And that's the latest from the ABC National Newsroom. Now back to the tally room in Canberra.
Welcome back to Australia Votes 2004, and from the election tally room in Canberra we're going to give you fast, accurate coverage from our team of experts with all the revealing insights you'll need tonight. After an hour of vote counting in the eastern states, 2 hours in Tasmania and half an hour in South Australia and the Territory, here's the overview of what's happened so far. With our scoreboard graphic, you'll, if we have it, no, we don't have the scoreboard graphic. What we can tell you though is that the Liberal vote nationally appears to be up about 3.8%. Now that figure is probably distorted somewhat because all of Tasmania's figures are in with very high counts so far, whereas of course across the eastern seaboard that count is much lower. But on that basis, 3.8%, that's not a good sign for Labor. If they're going to lose those 2 seats in Tasmania, Bass and Braddon, then they've got to find 15 seats across the mainland. And if the vote is running against them at this early stage, that's not a good sign. The Green vote would appear to be up about 2%. Labor's vote, Anthony Green, I guess, is roughly
at this stage, it's roughly
Steven.
It's coming back because we've got a dampening out of the swing from Tasmania, so it's not quite as pronounced. It's definitely not as pronounced on the mainland. The Green vote's up 2% overall, roughly what both of the opinion polls suggested this morning. We've seen, as you'd expect, a collapse in both the Democrat and the One Nation vote, though again that's affected by the Tasmanian figures where they didn't actually stand any candidates. And the figures are up 1.7.
OK, now, do we have the graphic that shows changing seats?
I'm in the hands of... We've had a power failure off the set there, so I'm just in the hands of... No, I don't have...
No, we don't have that.
The seats we've definitely given away are Bass and Braddon, and at this stage we've got some other seats. We've got Labor Party ahead in Parramatta, we've got the Liberals ahead in Bonner, we've got the Liberals ahead in Holt. I'll wait and see that one. So there's a
Bonner
lot
in
of...
Queensland.
Bonner in Queensland.
Is the new seat, right?
It's the new seat. There's a lot of early figures at this stage.
OK. Bob McMullen, where we left off before, I mean, you're saying, you're acknowledging obviously that you're in serious trouble in those 2 seats in Tasmania, but you take a seat like Eden Monaro, even allowing for the fact that that's an early vote, you've actually got some reason to feel optimistic, you think?
Well, I think the 3 seats that I've seen results that made me look that are a bit encouraging are Richmond, Eden Monaro and Parramatta. I'm not saying we're going to win them, far too early to say that, but there are positive trends, and if that's reflected across the eastern seaboard and in South Australia and the Northern Territory, then we'll start to become seriously competitive again. But it has to be. I mean, we need to win a lot of seats on the mainland, and if those figures that I've seen in those 3 seats are not reflected, well then we'll be at a stretch. But early to say. It's some encouraging signs.
One of the remarkable things about this campaign for me was the behind-the-scenes comment that you were getting from both sides, from those that you'd regard as the smart strategists, that they were having trouble really getting a feel for what was finally going to happen in the seat. Nick Minchin?
Yeah, no, it's one of those very difficult campaigns for people like us where it's very hard to get a feel for it. You've got 2 competing agendas from the 2 main parties which haven't really connected but have appealed to, swinging voters. So it's, we've always assumed this was going to be neck and neck. I think it will be tight tonight. But there's been this disconnect between the 2 agendas of the parties, Labor with a completely different agenda to ours, and it's a battle of the agendas. OK. One of those seats that was going to be interesting, even though it's held for Labor, and that's the seat of the inner city seat of Brisbane. Maxine, I think you've got some insight there coming up.
Okay. In fact, we are going to cross now to the Liberal candidate in the seat of Brisbane, Ingrid Tall. Ingrid, as you know, a redistribution, a pretty major redistribution of this seat has meant the Liberals have been fairly confident about picking this one up tonight. On the other hand, I'm hearing just here, we haven't seen too many figures, that Labor thinks it may hang on. Of course, that's better news for Arch Bevis than perhaps for you at this stage.
Maxine, I'm sorry, this earpiece is very blurry, but you did mention the boundary redistribution. It actually went from -3% to -1%. The polls in so far, only a few hundred votes have actually been counted. So for a doctor, it's a very small sample.
OK. I know that you had a lot to contend with in this campaign. I mean, you had a national party candidate who threw a few slurs your way, and also the Family First Party preferenced against you. Is that correct?
Maxine, I'm very much guessing what you're saying. You're talking about preferences. Sorry about this, but this is a seat often that is won on preferences, and it is.
Okay. All right, Ingrid Tall, we'll leave you. I know the audio is poor on both sides of this, but we'll hope to come back and see what the progress is later in the evening. But thanks for your presence for the moment. Kerry?
Maxine, there's a few early hiccups. There's been a power failure on the set that affected our computers for a moment. They appear to have gone down again, but I was hoping now to cross to the seat of Eden Monaro, which is one of the really important ones.
Yes, in Eden Monaro, we've now got 20 of the 72 booths with a preference count. As you can see, Gary Nairn is ahead on the primary votes, 4,400 to Kel Watts, 3,400. When we do turn that into percentages, what we see is the got a few slight delays going on at the moment when we see the percentages. Have I got some? Yes, I have. Sorry. Everything's coming back together down there. 48.9 to the Liberals, 37.9. When we factor in which booth that information is from, we have a 50.8%, a swing of 0.9 to Labor. The seat is in doubt. It's not enough to call yet at this stage.
OK, the seat of Dobell on the New South Wales coast just north of Sydney. This was once held by Michael Lee, but is now held very narrowly for the Liberals by Ken Ticehurst.
Well, this is a seat he won at the last election, defeating former Minister Michael Lee. He's ahead of David Meehan there, who's heads of the Trades and Labour Council of the Central Coast. He's ahead on the primaries. We've got a preference count in 8 of the 49 booths. At this stage, it's indicating a swing of 3.7% to the Liberal Party. It's saying a Lib retain at this stage. OK, now there's a lot of seats around the country we're going to be looking at over the next couple of hours. The seat of Bennelong, now's as good a time as any. This is the seat held by the Prime Minister with a margin, I think, of about 8%. Well, he's of course ahead on the primary votes. Nicole Campbell running for the second time. He's running second. Andrew Wilkie, the Green, is third. He's got 16% of the vote. John Howard on 48.9. We're factoring in preference counts in 8 of the 44 booths. It indicates a 5.6% swing. If that sort of swing continues, it'd be rather hard to seat to force to a by-election if there was a resignation. Very cheeky, Anthony. We'll come to that later. We might now go to the seat of Cunningham again, on the south coast of New South Wales, around Wollongong. This is held for the Greens in the lower house. Well, this might be slipping away from the Greens because they've fallen into third place. If they're in third place, they can't win the seat. So at this stage, the Labor Party is leading on 35.8, not a good vote. But the problem for the Greens is they're behind the Liberal candidate. And we're getting a preference count between the Labor Party and the Greens, which is indicating the Greens win. I'll have to change that. I'll have to turn off preferences in that electorate. We're not predicting a Green win. I'll just correct that. At this stage, that is not at all clear. The Electoral Commission is counting between the Labor Party and the Greens, so I don't think that's going to be the result. I will turn off the preference counts in that election. All right. Now, the seat of Moreton in Brisbane, the Labor Party going into this election had high hopes for Queensland, that Queensland was going to give them a strong head start towards a victory here. So the seat of Moreton was one of those seats that they were going to have to win government. Well, at this stage, they're struggling to get quite the swing they need. There's 7% counted. Gary Hargrave is ahead, Minister for Citizenship and Multiculturalism. There's a bit of a vote there for the Greens and Family First. We're factoring in 6 of the 35 booths with preference counts, and it's translating into a 1.5% swing. Not enough for Labor to win, but still it's in doubt. It's not a seat you can call with that percentage counted. OK, here's that high-interest seat now, the seat of Wentworth in Sydney's eastern suburbs. Historically, a blue ribbon Conservative seat ever since going back 100 yees. This is the Malcolm Turnbull seat. I'll warn my operators, I'm not going to do this two-party preferred in this electorate. We're seeing Malcolm Turnbull ahead, Labor second, Liberals third. We're going to look at the change in vote after this graphic. No, Peter King third. Sorry, Peter King third. I'm getting a bit excited here. 42% for the Liberal. Now, you'll have a contest, do you, Ed? Look at the change of vote here, and you can see most of the loss of support has been by the Liberal Party. The problem for Peter King was his ability to try and take votes off the Labor Party. He doesn't appear to have been able to do it. So at this stage, it's still in doubt. Well, it's going to depend very much where Peter King's preferences go, isn't it? We don't have any preference counts at this stage, so we can't really make a prediction.
In fact, just on the seat of Wentworth, we heard a little while ago there from Peter King, the independent Liberal candidate. We'll cross now to, in fact, David Patch. David Patch is the candidate there for the Australian Labor Party. David, what's your sense of how things have gone for you today, given some of those figures we've just quoted?
Well, it's much too close to call, and I think they have to be early figures. I've been waiting to go on air for the ABC for the last half hour, so I haven't been able to get any results from anyone.
I'll just help you out there. I'm sorry, I caught you there. What we just put up on the screen there was an ALP vote there of 25%. Interestingly, in a Green vote of 11%, and Peter King running third at this stage.
Look, it all depends on what boost that's from. The Labor primary vote in the last federal election was 29%. So if that's from Conservative booths, and it's likely to be because smaller booths tend to be the Conservative booths, that's a pretty good result. But it's very early days. It all depends on Peter King's preferences. But you know, there was a good feeling on the ground, and I'm proud of the campaign we've run. We have a great team, and we've done a great job, and we've campaigned for peace and for education and for Medicare. I mean, win or lose, I reckon we've won anyway.
What's it been like, though, in the last couple of weeks? I mean, with emotion so high in Wentworth, with clearly a split Conservative vote, and I mean, I have driven through the electorate. I have never seen so many posters on telegraph poles, whether it's yours or Peter King's or Malcolm Turnbull's. I mean, and you all must have been running into each other all the time.
Well, you know, I had the better posters, but it's been extremely hectic. I've been working very hard. I've been at the pre-poll all last week, 9 to 6 or 9 to 8, or 9 to 5, whenever it's shut. And I've been getting a very, very positive result. But I've got to say, if everybody that was polite to be voted for me, I'd win by 20%.
Well, we'll see how far civility goes. David Patch for that. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Maxine, just at this stage of the night, it's 7:15. There's obviously a lot to go, but with each minute that passes, the government is creeping closer to getting back in for a fourth term, you would have to say. Bob McMullen, very briefly, looking at those figures in the seat of Moreton in Brisbane, for instance, a slight swing to Labor, but at this stage not enough, and certainly no indication that a strong enough swing might be on in that Brisbane metropolitan area that was going to deliver you those crucial seats you needed.
The only two seats I've looked at, and I haven't been looking at Queensland much, Brisbane's a very big swing to us and Moreton not enough. Now, that could mean one of two things. It could mean that the pattern is of some big swings and therefore seats like Petrie and Dixon will be interesting, or it could simply mean that the incumbency factor is working and there's going to be a good result for all the sitting members, which would be very frustrating for us because we'll wind up with big majorities in our safe seats and not much elsewhere. That's always possible, but too early to say. But there's swings on in a number of seats, the ones we mentioned in New South Wales and seats like Moreton. But whether it's enough, I'm waiting rather anxiously to see.
Nick mentioned just before 7, you came about as close as you could to saying you think you're back without declaring. How are you feeling now?
Well, I'm feeling pretty good, but I won't, actually call it yet. But I'd point out in Queensland, we got nearly a 55% two-party preferred vote at the last election. You'd expect some drift back from that. That's an extraordinary two-party preferred. Let's say we lose 1% of that, and that wouldn't surprise me. It still doesn't actually threaten any Liberal seat. So we could suffer a swing in Queensland of 1.5% and not lose any seats.
Okay. Well, we'll continue our seat run as we go, and we go to Victoria now and the regional seat of Bendigo. Anthony?
Well, this is a seat won at the GST election in 1998 by the Labor Party, and it's been held by... This is the battle of the Gibbons. Kevin Gibbons from the Liberal Party and Steve Gibbons from the Labor Party. At this stage on the primary vote, the Labor Party's behind, but this is a seat where the Labor Party is normally behind on the early figures and they improve as the night goes on. At this stage, there's a 2.6% swing to the Liberal Party, which means the seat's in doubt, which is sort of not what the swing we expected to see in that electorate, but we'll see how the later figures pull on.
Okay, the seat of Richmond in northern New South Wales, Larry Anthony's seat again. This was a seat that Labor had high hopes for.
We've now got 21 of the 58 booths. The swing, Larry Anthony's ahead on the primaries. There's a substantial vote for the Greens there. That's been falling as the bigger booths have come in because, I mean, the Greens do have their best early figures in Richmond from the small booths. And once those figures are settling down, it's turning into a 2% swing to Labor. That's an in-doubt seat, not one you can call.
Okay, the seat of McEwen in Victoria.
Well, this is a vast central seat. I mean, coming from New South Wales, I've never understood why this is a marginal seat, because to me it looks very rural, but it's in Victoria, it's a seat which always seems to be sort of sitting there at the point of the pendulum. Fran Bailey's won it, she's lost it, she's won it again, and at this stage she looks like she's going to increase her majority. We're seeing the sort of trend which a lot of polls pointed to, is that the election's sort of returning the members who held their seats, where whichever party held the seat is tending to hang on. And at this stage, a 3% swing to the Liberal Party, which would increase Fran Bailey's majority. That's 16 of the 75 booths.
Okay, now the seat of Adelaide, this again is held by the Liberals by Trish Worth on a very slender margin. This was a seat that Labor had to win government. Anthony?
Oh, these are very early figures. We've got 1 of 58 booths on these figures, and I'd have to look where these are coming from. I didn't expect to see an Adelaide figure at this stage. 46.4. We've got a preference count in one booth, indicating a 5.8% swing, which says Labor gain. Discount that at this stage. A 5.8% swing in one booth is not. You need to get 3 or 4 before you get a handle on that.
OK, now we're going to come back to the seat of Moreton in suburban Brisbane, a seat held for the Liberal Party by Gary Hardgrave. One of those seats, as we were saying just a few moments ago, Labor really has to win if it's got any chance of forming a government.
Well, Gary Hardgrave is still leading ahead of Labor's Graham Perrott at this stage. We've got a preference count in 9 of the 50-odd booths, 35 booths, and it's indicating a 0.4% swing to the Liberal Party, in which case, if that was to continue, the Liberal Party will retain it. I'd wait for a few more booths in that electorate, but at this stage, that is not the sort of swing you'd be expecting to see if Labor was going to win this election.
All right, well, another Brisbane seat, the seat of Rankin, held by one of Labor's front benchers, Craig Emerson, on a margin of 2.4%.
Well, we've got quite a peculiar-looking set of figures here. There's a Craig Emerson's ahead on the primary votes from Wendy Creighton from the Liberal Party. There is a National standing in this seat. I don't think they've polled many votes, though. 46.5 to Labor. When we're factoring in preferences from 4 of 29 booths, it's showing a 3.5% swing. Now, that swing was showing something like 10% a few minutes ago. So 4 of 29 booths, there's obviously a bit of variability. That's obviously a safer Labor part of the electorate where there's a swing occurred. So I'd wait. Darren Power is an independent standing in that seat. And he's a local councillor on Logan City. I'm not sure where his preferences were going. OK,
the seat of McMillan in Victoria, this again is a key seat. This is a Labor Party seat that has been redistributed, which really, on paper, puts it in the hands of the Liberal Party.
Well, Russell Broadbent was the former member for McMillan. He also held Coronella at one stage, and he's run for several other seats in this part of town. He comes from Pakenham. Now, the one thing to be cautious of this electorate, the last 15 booths all come from the big mining towns, and they're the best booths for Labor. At this stage, you tend to get, we've got 22 of 83 booths, which are the more rural end of the electorate. They're indicating a 1.8% swing to the Liberals. Now, Christian Zara needs a 2.9% swing to him to win the electorate. So the swings at the moment is going the wrong way for him to hold that seat.
In fact, we're going to cross to Christian Zara right now in the middle of the electorate of McMillan. Christian Zara, I guess you'll be a bit of a Labor hero tonight if you can hold this seat, because as Anthony said, it's now marginally Liberal.
Well, it would be great to win the seat, and we've campaigned very heavily on local issues here. And all we've got are those figures that you mentioned before. We've got about 6 or 7% of the vote counted, and we've had what looks like a minus result, minus 1.9%. So it's hard to tell because, as Anthony mentioned before, all that we've got in are the very small rural booths, and it'll take probably another hour or so yet before we get any of the big booths coming in from some of the bigger centres along the Princess Highway and South Gippsland.
In fact, what's the feedback been during the day from some of your party workers in some of those bigger booths?
Look, it's really hard to tell. I think we've had something like 10 or 12 booths in, and 6 of them have been good swings to us and 6 of them have been swings away from us. So it's really difficult to get a sense as to whether or not there's a clear swing right across the electorate at this early stage. But McMillan's always a tough electorate to win. It's always been a marginal seat, and it's far too early for us to make a determination as to whether or not we're going to be able to get that plus 3% swing for us to hold the seat based on the new boundaries.
All right. Christian Zara for that. Thanks very much at this stage.
Thanks, Maxine.
OK, and at this stage, I think we're going to be a little bit bold. Anthony Green, you're going to stick your neck out?
Look, we've got the coalition already up to 69 seats, and there are, I'm just having a quick look here, about 20 seats in which there are no figures yet, and about half of them are coalition seats, none of which they actually look like they're going to lose. So at this stage, you'd say that we're tracking towards the coalition being re-elected. I'd sort of want to wait a little bit longer before I say that's absolutely definite, but there's no indication at this stage of a change of government. The coalition would have to lose 8 seats. There's no sign of them losing 8 seats. Labor needs 13 seats to form government. No sign of them gaining 13 seats. So Labor, I think, is highly unlikely on these results to win government. And at this stage, it looks like the government isn't going to lose 8 seats, in which case it would be returned.
Nick Minchin, I know that you've got some constraints on you at this stage, but I think your smile probably says it all. I mean, we haven't even started counting in Western Australia yet, but do you see anything to disagree with Anthony on?
Well, there is half an hour of voting still to go in Western Australia, so we don't want to say anything that influences that, but I think
Just
Anthony's
smile at the
right.
camera.
There isn't what Labor would want, a clear trend to Labor sufficient to suggest a change of government is on the cards. There's an outside chance of a hung parliament still, because there are different results coming from different parts of different seats. And I think this is, we have this phenomenon of the collapse of the Democrats, the rise of the Greens, and a massive preference flow from the Greens to Labor. So I'd like to think Anthony was right, but I'm not going to call it yet.
Bob?
Well, obviously I'm not going to call it yet, but I'd like to see the trend better in a lot of seats than it is. The swing's going to us in probably enough seats, but at the moment it doesn't look to me like enough of them are big enough. So it'll need to improve. But in Victoria, what there seems to be is a pattern that the early booths are not going well for us, but where you have urban things, it looks a bit better. So we'll wait and see, but I'd certainly like to be doing better at the moment than we are.
Thanks for that, Kerry. I've been joined now by Senator Helen Coonan, of course, New South Wales Liberal Senator and Minister for Communications. You've heard what Nick Minchin's had to say. He's smiling and you're smiling too.
Well,
Looks
of
like
course,
you're home.
at this stage, of course, we're smiling, but I do agree with Nick that it's, the trend looks very positive and very encouraging to be a very brave person who calls it yet, but certainly we're feeling a bit more comfortable than we did an hour ago.
What are you hearing about your home turf? And when I say home turf, I mean particularly the Sydney seats, say
Yes.
Wentworth, Parramatta, and whether or not you're hopeful about, say, a seat like Greenway.
Well, certainly I do think that it's starting to look very positive for Malcolm Turnbull, and that, of course, will be a great relief for
Now,
Liberals.
in fact, that was a worry for a while because
It was.
you thought that there was no sure thing about a week ago, didn't you?
Yes, that's right. I've been out on the pre-poll, and I must say I was a bit concerned after that, but I couldn't be more delighted if, in fact, that does now look that Malcolm Turnbull will be joining us in Parliament. He's going to be a very interesting new addition, I think, to the Liberal lineup.
You want to pick another adjective?
No, that'll do for the
Interesting
moment.
will do for the moment.
That'll do for the moment. And, of course, out in Greenway, Louise Marcus has really run an unbelievable campaign. She's got that great support, of course, from the Hillsong Church. She's a very solid person, and I think that that's had a real effect on the demographics out there. Lots of young families, very aspirational, and I think it's really shown the march of the Liberals into Western Sydney. If it holds out there, I do think that that's going to be because people like Louise Marcus put their hands up and obviously appeal to the new type of demographic.
And with, if it is confirmed that in fact John Howard has won a fourth, what would you put that down to?
Oh, I think very largely the fact that people do want to have interest rates that they can afford, a strong economy going forward, and they weren't prepared to take a leap in the dark with an untried person who put himself forward for Prime Minister. I think the L campaign, the Latham Lerner campaign, really bit. And of course, as earlier commentators have said, it came very much back onto our strong turf, which is to keep the economy strong and interest rates low.
Helen Coonan, for the moment, thanks.
Thanks, Nancy.
And at this stage of the evening, it's looking extremely healthy for the John Howard government that will be returned to a fourth term. Of course, the counting hasn't finished in in Western Australia, but with 15% of the vote counted, and we might pull up the first of our summary graphics, the scoreboard graphic, you see 17% of the vote counted. The combined primary vote of the Liberal National Party is about 46%. Labor is languishing under 40% at around 38%. The Greens have 7%. But if you look at the seats won and lost, the Liberal Party, according to our computer system, has won 54 seats, the National Party 12 seats, and Labor has won 46 seats. So there's a combined coalition count there of 66 seats. They need 76 to form a government. Can we look at the national trends graphic now, which will show the swings? Again, 19% of the vote counted now, and you see a 3.4% swing to the Liberals. And for Labor, we'll just wait for that to come up. It's a very slight swing away. Now, that does not augur well for Mark Latham's first tilt at government. Again, certainly to the Greens. We might now take a look at the chamber graphic and the seats won and lost. Anthony?
Well, what we're seeing in the chamber, we'll fill in first the seats we've definitely given away, and we'll see why I'm sort of pointing the election. It fills in, we've got 58. Now, this takes account of some seats in Western Australia and South Australia, which are not, you know, in the scoreboard and on the bottom of frame, we're only including seats with votes. In this, we actually make some predictions in some of the safer seats with no votes. So we're saying the coalition's there definitely up to 70 at this stage. We'll add a few likely seats, and at this stage, when you add a few more likelies, the coalition's getting up to 76, which is just over halfway. And that's before we're making a prediction. We're not predicting the seats in doubt. We're using the seats which are either definitely won or strongly leaning one way or the other, and the coalition would be back just on those.
Nick Minchin?
Well, I'm just looking at your primary swings with 19% counted, albeit influenced a bit by Tasmania. You've got the Labor primary vote below last time. I mean, last time was the second worst Labor primary vote on record. And at this stage, with nearly, 1/5 of the nationwide vote counted, they're below last election's primary vote. So it's not looking great for Labor, but there's still another 80% to count.
Bob McMullen?
Well, obviously nobody likes to be behind in seats you want to be in front in. There's a few seats like Parramatta and Richmond still looking really interesting, but if you drew the line now and said this is it, you'd say there's not enough. But there's a lot to go, and we need to improve.
Okay, well, we might keep going with the seats. Those interesting seats tonight. The seat of Parramatta in Sydney, Ross Cameron, the sitting member, but a few personal problems that put his seat in jeopardy.
Well, this is the one seat which is starting to lean towards Labor. We have Julie Owens is now ahead on the primary votes, and some of the preferences will tend to favour her. In percentage terms, you can see that slight difference. There's quite a number of candidates in this electorate. I can't tell you all of them, but when we've got a preference count in 15 of the 43 booths, which is a third of them, the swing is now 2.5%. It's in doubt. Labor's ahead. It's not giving it away. But that's a seat where Labor is doing better than some others.
Okay, again, Greenway in Western Sydney, a Labor-held seat going into this election, but no sitting member, and a seat that was in trouble for Labor.
Well, we've got 7 of the 43 booths on primaries, 6 of them on preferences. Ed Husick is trailing on the primary votes behind Louise Marcus. There's 13%, there's 14 candidates in this electorate. It's quite a small board of options. People who say Australians never get a choice at elections haven't voted in some of these electorates with 14 candidates. But at this stage, it's showing a 4.4% swing to the Liberal Party. Still saying in doubt, there's a lot more booths to come, and that's going to be a slow count because of the sheer number of candidates.
Okay, we're going to jump to Queensland now, and another one of those marginal Liberal seats that Labor had to win to form a government. Mel Bruff's seat of Longman.
We got primary counts in 20 booths, we've got preference counts in 8, and this is a bad result for the Labor Party at this stage. Mel Bruff is well ahead on the primaries, 36.6 to Labor. Very small vote for the Green, as there tends to be in these outer suburban electorates. And if you look at the swing that's occurring in the 8 booths we have, and I must admit 6.5% is a lot bigger than I would have expected, which makes me think there are a few outlying rural booths. So I'd be prepared to wait a bit longer and see what happens to the swing, but it'd be very hard for Labor to turn that swing around.
You don't want to do it for it. Okay, now the seat of Wakefield in South Australia. This was an interesting seat, and I know Nick Minchin was pretty hopeful.
Well, Martin Evans is ahead in the primaries. Now, this is an electorate that extends from Elizabeth and all those solid Labor voting parts of northern Adelaide. It extends through Gawler and up to the Clare and Gilbert Valley. So it's a highly diverse electorate. At this stage, Labor's ahead on the primary votes. We're factoring in the preference counts from 6 of 57 booths. So this is a prediction, and it's showing a 4.9% swing to Labor. Now, I'm not sure what booths they are. I suspect with only 6 of 57, that preference count probably comes from a rural area. Saying Lib leading, I think that's probably a good place to leave it at this moment. You really have to wait for the Smithfield and Elizabeth and Parafield Gardens.
One of the Elizabeth booths is in this count, and there are some small metropolitan booths. This is a seat, we thought would be a dark horse in this election, because one of the features of this election is redistributions in South Australia, Victoria and Queensland, which always, upset the apple cart. And we've got a fantastic candidate in this seat, and I think this is a seat to watch through the night. It could be a distinct Liberal gain in this seat in South Australia.
Okay, the seat of Dixon, which we're looking at for the first time tonight. This is a seat that was held and lost by Cheryl Curnow, a seat that has not been held for successive elections by anybody thus far. sitting Liberal. Anthony?
The curse of Dixon. Peter Dutton's trying to overcome it. He's currently leading on the primary votes ahead of Craig McConnell, local councillor. As you can see there, those primary votes indicating a substantial lead to him. He's got 12 of the 28 primary booths, 6 of the 28 after preferences. It's a 0.3% swing, and it did look like the swing was inflated at the last election because of the Kernow factor, but if those figures continue, Peter Dutton should be re-elected.
Maxine?
To Peter Dutton in the heart of Dixon, that 0.3% swing, Peter, is that making you feel reasonably confident at this stage? What, 23% of the vote counted?
Well, it's still very early days. We've got some preliminary figures in. We're certainly encouraged by those. I need to see some more figures before we can make any definitive statements, but certainly on the ground today there was a good feeling, and I think it reflects the fact that we've been working hard for the last 3 years, and that's what we need to continue to do should we be successful tonight.
The Prime Minister was quite visible in your electorate and, in fact, across the whole metro area in Brisbane. Clearly, you feel that the coalition message has got through, that the alternative in Mark Latham is just too inexperienced this time round.
I've lost you there, I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback.
Yeah, I was just making the point that the Prime Minister has been extremely visible in your electorate of Dixon and across Brisbane generally. A lot of trips to Queensland.
Well, I think the campaign was obviously about people and their concerns with interest rates. I saw that the Howard government had been very convincing over the last 8.5 years in terms of economic management, and I think when you couple that with working hard on local issues and trying to identify with local constituents about what's important to them, then that provides benefits to us.
All right. Peter Dutton, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thanks very much, and we'll continue to watch Dixon, obviously, during the evening. Stephen Smith, I want to come back to you at this point. This is all adding up to a pretty grim picture for Labor tonight, isn't it?
Well, Max, I think the traditional thing to say at this stage is it's still early days, but I think, frankly, we're past that. We, in my view, will struggle very much to win government unless we've got a primary vote with a 4 in front of it, 40 or more.
But in fact, you're struggling even to pick up any seats at the moment, aren't you?
Well, firstly, we don't seem to have the primary vote. So in terms of, and it's not my job to claim or concede, but in terms of the analysis, in terms of us winning government, we don't seem to have that momentum required in the marginal seats to get the 13 to 15 seats required if you take into account the serious nature of Bass and Braddon. So from that perspective, it's grim with a capital G and trouble with a capital T.
Why do you think you've been unable to lift that primary vote through the campaign? If it's around 40% or just a bit lower, that's exactly what Newspoll has been tracking right through the campaign.
Well, the campaign's been an arm wrestle, an arm wrestle between the government saying, we've had the benefit of 14 years of economic growth and economic prosperity, don't change, and us saying, in a country as well off as Australia with that economic prosperity, why don't we have world-class education and health systems? And we've got a new dynamic leader. That's been the arm wrestle. And at this point in the evening, the regrettable aspect appears to be that on the arm wrestle hasn't gone our way.
In fact, I'm just looking at some of those previous figures we had, say, in the seat of a state like South Australia, where Labor was hoping to pick up maybe 3 seats. It looks like, far from that being the case, you could be in trouble in a seat like Wakefield, held by Martin Evans, and there's a big vote there for Family First. Not surprising.
Yeah, just one thing I have picked up, there does seem to be just some discrepancies with the AEC figures on primary and two-party preferred, both in Queensland and in South Australia. It's very early days in Wakefield, but in South Australia we think we're doing better in Bonner and Petrie than the AEC 2PP is reflecting.
They're the Queensland seats.
So I think it's still an early night in this respect. It's an early night in the sense of knowing which ones we might get and which ones we might go under. But I think it's gone a fair bit past that in terms of trying to find the momentum at this stage of the evening to pick up the 13 odd seats we need to form a government.
So Labor at this stage is looking at another hard 3 years in opposition.
What, you think I came on your show so you could depress me?
No, but you've been with Mark Latham for the past 6 weeks and clearly worked very hard. I mean, there were points in that campaign where he did look to have tremendous momentum. What do you think happened in the last, say, 10 days?
Well, I was with him for 5 out of the 6 weeks, and I think Mark went into the campaign as an opposition leader, and he emerged as a person who now I think the community regards as a person who could be Prime Minister. in every set...
Not just yet.
Well,
would that be right? Not just yet. Is
well,
that what Australians are really saying tonight?
Well, I think you've got to leave that analysis, you know, for a bit later. But in terms of all the set pieces, the formal set pieces, the campaign launch, the debate, the press club, he conducted himself like a Prime Minister. But I thought his most prime ministerial moment was the moment when he was under most pressure, and that was his response to the Jakarta tragedy, where I thought for the first time in 3 consecutive press conferences, he had the air of a man who had the weight of the nation's future on his shoulder and conducted himself as a Prime Minister ought to.
All right. For the moment, Stephen, thank you. Kerry?
Thanks, Maxine. And I know at times Australians tend to view their politics as a blood sport, but we're reminded from time to time on a night like this that it's also a very tough business for those who are in it. And in Tasmania, I understand that the sitting Labor member for Bass, rather emotionally, just a few moments ago, has conceded.
They're talking about Bass. They're talking about Bass.
We did one of the best forestry policies that I think we've ever done, but I'm afraid we have an awful lot to be proud of in our leader of Mark Latham. He's an amazing person who really deserves to be Prime Minister of this country. Oh no, I'm going to cry, go away. But I'm afraid we have to accept reality and congratulate the Liberal candidate for Bass. We have to concede defeat. We have lost the seat. But hopefully we'll still win some more seats on the mainland and we'll be okay. But in terms of the Labor Party, thank you all for the work you've done, but I'm afraid we've lost. But thank you very much for the work you've done.
And for every loser, there's a winner, of course. Maxine McHugh, I think we have a winner standing by in Bass.
Indeed, the victor, Kerry, Michael Ferguson. We cross to you now in Bass. You've just heard Michelle O'Byrne's concession there. Quite a triumph for you, first as a political operator. Michael Ferguson, can you hear me in Bass?
I'm sorry, Maxine, if you'd like to repeat the question.
Yes, Michael Ferguson. As I said, we just heard Michelle O'Byrne's concession here tonight. Clearly quite a triumph for the campaign you've run.
Well, we've worked very hard since February 7 on this campaign, and I've been blessed with a fantastic family and a fantastic campaign team and a fantastic army of volunteers, and they've all helped to make this happen today.
What do you think, particularly in the last, I suppose, couple of weeks of this campaign, with a lot of activity in your state and a lot of issues bubbling, what are the key issues do you think have got you here tonight?
Well, the key issue here in Bass has been people's living standards and who they trust, as you've heard the Prime Minister say in the past, who they trust to manage Australia's economy. If we've got a healthy economy and interest rates are low, it allows the government to spend and improve priorities on those other issues that are also important to people, health and education, and also looking after our environment, local Tamar River, Launceston air quality. These are the issues that matter here in Bass.
I also know you self-identify as a committed Christian. To what extent do you think those values will affect your new life in Canberra as a federal parliamentarian?
Well, I love the Lord, I'm a Christian, and that's something that I hold dear to me. Not everybody will agree with that, but I hope that these values that I hold dear will help me to be an honest local member and somebody who will work hard and someone who people can trust and at least have some confidence that he's working in their interests.
All right. Michael Ferguson, congratulations and thanks for joining us for the moment.
Thank you.
And we're going to continue our seat run now, looking back again at the seat of Eden Monaro in southern New South Wales, east from Canberra, the national capital, to the coast. Anthony Green?
Gary Nan's well ahead on the primary votes there, 48.5 to 38.1, 8.4 for the Greens. In fact, the Labor vote's gone, Labor and Green vote have both gone up at this election, as has the Liberal vote. There seems to be a swing of 0.3% to the Labor Party, which is probably Libertine. There's 42 of the 72 booths counted there. I'd just be a bit cautious because that one, from my memory of Eden Monaro, does tend to bounce backwards and forwards a bit, but the Liberals would be happy to be ahead at this stage of the night in Eden Monaro. OK, now the seat of Richmond, held by National Party Minister Larry Anthony, also a very tight electorate. Well, he's well ahead there on the primaries, but there is a substantial vote for the Greens in that electorate. 11.7 for the Greens, 36 to Labor, 46 to the Nationals. I presume the big Tweed Head booths to come. We've got preference counts in half of the booths, indicating a swing of 2% to Labor, which puts Labor just ahead. That seat is in doubt. We'll be sitting here for quite a while on that seat.
OK, the seat of Adelaide, probably one of the few seats left going into election day where Labor had any real confidence of winning. How's it looking now? Trish Worth, the sitting member?
You can tell the tight contest because it takes a while to get the two candidate preferred in. At this stage, Trish Worth's ahead 45 to the Labor's 42. Kate Ellis there. And after the distribution of preferences, we're seeing a swing of 1.4 to the Liberal Party. That's on 6 of 58 booths. We've had only 6 preference counted booths, and that swing has jumped backwards and forwards with every extra booth. So just wait a bit longer on that one. It's quite validly left in doubt.
OK, the seat of Wakefield, and I know Nick Minchin's had high hopes for this seat. It's held by Labor on a slender margin of 1.3%, but in a state, South Australia, which was expected to poll strongly for Labor.
All right, well, that seat's come back to being definitely in doubt. Martin Evans is ahead. David Fawcett, the Liberal David Fawcett, is a test pilot. Used to be a test pilot at the Air Force Base down there, so he's used to a few high risks, I think, so he'll be hanging in there. And at this stage, we're showing a swing of 1.7% to the Liberals, and he could actually hold it, could actually win it.
Martin Evans, we cross to you now in Wakefield. You've got to be one of the more nervous people in your own state of South Australia tonight. What's your sense of things?
Oh, yes, I think so. Yes. I mean, we had a very good feel on the booths today, but it's a very marginal seat, second most marginal Labor seat in the country. So, yes, we're hanging on tonight and waiting to see the final result.
What do you think has happened, though? Because, as you know, there were tremendous hopes from Labor's point of view that South Australia would deliver big gains, at least 2 to 3 seats. They certainly didn't reckon, at the beginning of this campaign, on going down a seat in South Australia.
No, that's true, and we haven't yet. So I'm pretty confident that at the end of the day we'll hold on to Wakefield. I always have been, and I remain optimistic.
What have been the key issues that have that affected all this, do you think, in your own state?
Well, in South Australia, I think pretty much the national issues. I don't think we've had any separate issues that would have swung people here. People have focused on health and interest rates, and obviously at the end of the day they've made their own decision. Perhaps interest rates would have been the one issue which would have focused them more than any other if they were voting for the government. But look, we still have to find out what the final outcome is.
What about sentiment about Mark Latham? Do you think the Liberal charge that he has been or still is the L-plate learner leader, do you think that has bitten?
Well, obviously that would be an issue with some people. I mean, negative advertising does have an impact at the end of the day. I think he ran a very good campaign, though. I was very impressed by the campaign that Mark ran, and I think it was a very positive one. And I personally favour positive campaigns. I hate to see that negative campaigning in Australia, and if it did affect a few votes, well, so be it. I'd rather be associated with a positive, forward-looking campaign myself.
OK. Martin Evans, thanks very much for joining us at this stage.
Thank you.
We're going to look at the seat of Lyons back in Tasmania now, one of those seats that Labor has probably held, but we might just take a look at that seat. Anthony?
Oh, Dick Adams has held this seat. He's well ahead. He's a big electorate, and Labor's ahead on the primary votes, and they'll go on to win after the distribution of preferences. There's a substantial swing against Labor, but Dick Adams has held this seat quite comfortably.
And we're crossing now to Dick Adams. Dick Adams, you, of course, were the most critical of the Tasmanian Labor members in the wake of Mark Latham's decision on forests in the past week. Do you think your view is being vindicated in the results we're seeing tonight?
Well, we was always going to get a whack for that policy. That policy was always going to go down in Tasmania very badly. And though they got a lot of advice nationally about forestry, they brought down a policy that has certainly cost two of my colleagues their seats tonight.
So it was a mistake?
I believe it was a mistake. I believe it was the wrong policy. It wouldn't have mattered if it was $3 billion in compensation. It wouldn't have been what was needed. Industry was always going to react. After the policy was brought down, there was no shadow minister here selling the policy, though I don't believe that would have changed very much. But the policy was always going to cost us a lot of votes in Tasmania.
All right. Dick Adams, for that, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now, Nick Minchin, I think you've got some late information on Parramatta.
Well, the information I'm getting is that from our point of view, Parramatta and Richmond are line ball, and we get seats we're going to have to watch tonight. They really are in the hard basket. But on the other hand, Greenway is still a possibility for us to gain. And I'm also assured that in Victoria we will be able to hold the line. There were 3 seats there potentially we thought we might be in trouble, particularly Macmillan, which is held by a Labor member, although Liberal on the new boundaries. That now appears to be clearly a Liberal win. So Victoria, which was a worry for us, I think is now looking pretty solid.
So talking pragmatically, you've got a very clear cushion that even if a seat like Parramatta or Richmond were to fall.
Well, let's say, Adelaide, I think, is still going to be tough for us to hold. Parramatta and Richmond, but at this stage, even if we lost all 3, we're still well ahead.
Okay, now we're going to continue our seat run. We're going to look at the new seat of Bonner in Brisbane, which I think was on paper a marginal Liberal seat. Anthony?
Well, Con Shaka is contesting this seat, and he's moved from the electorate of Bowman. So he's done.
That's right, sorry, it's a marginal Labor seat.
Yes, it's a marginal Labor, it's a new seat named after former Senator Neville Bonner, the first Indigenous senator, of course. At this stage, on the primary votes, he's ahead, marginally, very close. But when we're factoring in preference counts in 13 of the 40 booths, there's a 1.9% swing against Labor, making it 50-50. It's always interesting to see a 50-50 seat. It's generally in doubt, but I really would wait a while before sort of calling Bonner on those figures.
Okay, the seat of Holt.
Oh, I can see why we've got a Holt in here, but they're very slow, very early. I'm not sure what figures I'm looking at now. All right, Holt's on 7181 for the Labor Party, 5876 for the Liberals. Look at that in percentage terms. We've got 7 of the 23 booths. They're all quite big booths in this electorate, and we have preference counts in 3 of them, indicating a 9% swing against Labor. Now, I'm a bit doubtful of that. That doesn't flow through from the primary votes I'm seeing there. So I think there might be a couple of 2-party booths with unusual swings in that electorate. So I wouldn't worry too much about that one yet. I think we'll have to wait. That's a rather slow count.
Okay, well, Nick Minchin was expressing some doubt about Parramatta, and we've actually got some new figures on Parramatta. This is the Liberal marginal seat in Western Sydney, held by the recently controversial Ross Cameron.
Yes, I wonder if he's been watching the cricket this week. Julie Owens is the Labor candidate. She's used to head the Independent Record Association, so she's rather quiet candidate compared to Cameron, who's quite high profile, but she seems to be polling quite well at this stage, with over half of the booths in, 17 of them with preference counts, and at this stage we're showing a 3.1% swing to Labor, which would make it a seat Labor could win, and the computer's giving it away. Once again, we'll wait for a few more votes in that electorate.
Okay, the seat of Hindmarsh in Adelaide's western suburbs. This was held for the Liberal Party for a long time by Chris Gallis. She's retiring at this election. It's a marginal Liberal seat on 1%.
Well, we've got Simon Birmingham ahead of Steve Georgianis, who's trying for the 3rd time. He's been defeated twice by Chris Gallis, was hoping to win this time. On the primary counts, in 6 of 46 booths, he's behind Georgianis. And we're estimating, these are an estimate of preferences, we haven't got any preference counts. It's a 1.9% swing. That is in doubt, and we haven't got preference counts in that electorate, so we have to wait on that one. OK, now the seat of Macon, also in Adelaide, another seat that Labor had some hopes for. Trish Draper's on 4,000 odd votes there. Tony Zappia, who's a former national powerlifting champion and former mayor of Salisbury. He was put in as the Labor candidate, a bit of a star because he was well known locally rather than another factional hack. And the Liberal Party vote is well up there. The Family First got 4.6% of the vote. They did better than that at the state election in that area in South Australia. It's translating into a 4.3% swing to Labor, but we haven't got a preference count. You'd have to wait to see the preference count, and it may depend on how well Family First are handing out how to vote cards.
It is only 2 booths,
yeah.
So let's not get too carried away.
He did say early.
I didn't call it.
Gary, we'll talk now just a bit about the metro seats and what the picture is, sort of how the picture's shaping up there. Michael, what have you got for us on that?
Well, look, I think it's important at this point to talk about what was going to be the defining winner, I think, for John Howard's government, which was the scare on interest rates, and that's had a very big impact around the metropolitan seats and the outer metropolitan seats of Sydney, and particularly in Brisbane, around in Queensland as well. The swing to the lids in Queensland is 3.4% at the moment, and I mean, if interest rates were going to bite anywhere, I think they were going to bite in if this issue was going to bite anywhere, it was going to bite in the sort of ring seats around Sydney, where people have very big mortgages now. So even the smallest rise in interest rates would affect people quite significantly.
As they do in South East Queensland as well.
As they do in South East Queensland, and I think that's what we're seeing at the moment. But if we look at a couple of seats, particularly in New South Wales, I mean, we'll look at Parramatta first. We've been talking a little bit about Parramatta. This one is perhaps one of those exceptions where, as we know, Ross Cameron has outed himself as an adulterer some time ago, not long before the campaign.
You'd have to say there were significant personal issues
there were significant personal
to do with that.
So Labor looks like it's got that.
But interestingly, I think Family First were preferencing Ross Cameron. I haven't seen his figures on Family First there, but it doesn't look to be significant at this stage.
Well, there's a swing to the Labor Party of 3.3% at this point, so it looks like Labor might get that one. But DeBell, where they were hoping this was one of the seats where Labor really did need to win in New South Wales, there's a swing toward Ken Ticehurst of about 4%, I think. And of course, he's a very popular local candidate.
Now, again, in that seat, Michael, there's a significant elderly population. Again, you would have thought that something like a Medicare Gold would be helpful for Labor there, but apparently not.
Well, it just doesn't seem to have bitten, does it? So, you know, the Medicare Gold stuff, I think there were enough doubts sown about Medicare Gold and how it was going to be funded in a sort of counter-attack by the government for that, to counter the impact, perhaps, as we're seeing in places like DeBell. We've got, if we go to somewhere like the seat of Lindsay, where Jackie Kelly, who's one of John Howard's favourites, and she was one of those who came in when this big sweep west of the Liberal Party started to happen in the 90s, 96. There's a tiny swing there to Labor, but not enough to unseat her, so she's going to be safe. But look, I think the really interesting one in New South Wales, at least in that part of Western Sydney, is Greenway. We've been talking a little bit about this, but the demographics in Greenway are changing probably faster than anywhere else. And we're seeing the sort of the rollout of the McMansions there, and the swing.
And of course, just go on.
Well, the swing to the Liberals is over 4%. But once again, this is a local, hard-working, local Liberal candidate who's backed by the Hillsong Church.
And in fact, she's a new candidate there for the Liberal Party, and of course, Labor has had a new candidate, Nettie Husick, because it was the retiring Frank Mossfield, wasn't it? That's right.
Exactly. But Louise Marcus, I was out with her campaigning in the early days of the campaign, and she was a tireless campaigner.
There is a bit of a trend here. As I said, we've seen the new member in Bass, Michael Ferguson, committed Christian, as is Louise Marcus in Greenway.
It's starting to come through very powerfully.
This could be the 2004 campaign where, in fact, the committed Christians certainly make their presence felt in the new parliament.
Well, and Louise Marcus has had a lot of support from the Hillsong Church. You know, her campaign has pretty much been bankrolled by Hillsong. But yes, I mean, the rise of Family First as well, I think, has been very important. So this is an interesting development.
Okay, Michael, thanks for that. Kerry?
Thanks, Maxine. And Bob McMullen, in terms of the big picture tonight, Labor's new star, Mark Latham, there's not a lot of good news for you, is there?
No.
Yes.
Well, you asked me a question.
You're not feeling particularly expansive at this moment,
no,
are you?
I'm happy to talk. I was being a bit flippant.
Are there any glimmers at all?
Yes, of course. There are seats where we'll win and where we'll get new members. It looks like we'll win Parramatta, and she'll be a very good member, and I think we still look like we might pick up a few others like Richmond, but the overall picture is the primary vote is too low. The national primary vote is too low, and no Labor Party person can be happy when we're polling less than 40% of the national primary vote, and I'm not. And that's something we'll need to give some serious thought to. I mean, in a sense, if all that was going to the Greens and coming back to us, you'd say, well, long term that's a problem, but for this election it doesn't matter. But clearly that's not happening. It's happening in some seats, and it's good to see. It looks like Cunningham's coming back to us and a few of those things we needed to do, the building blocks we needed, but we're not building on top of it. You know, some of the core basic things that needed to happen have happened, but we haven't built on top of it to turn it into enough seats.
Now, we know that you had to win 13 seats to win government, including Cunningham, which everyone expected to come back to you. But can you say, even with any confidence at this stage, that you're sure you will have some net gain of seats?
No.
So it's possible that there could be a net loss of seats to Labor?
Yes, I mean, I couldn't hear all that Martin Evans was saying, but I heard he was saying he thought he would still win. But I mean, Martin's in a battle, so that's... and we've had very bad news in Tasmania. So I think, and there might be some other colleagues, and the seat of Greenway is clearly a big struggle for us. So I'm not feeling at this stage, even that I would predict that we're going to have net gains. I'm not saying we won't. I think on balance we're more likely to than not. But if you're asking me to be adamant about that, I can't.
But no obvious mainland benefit at all out of the old growth forest policy in Tasmania, and 2 seats lost.
Yeah, it's hard to interpret that yet. I mean, because you never get in all other things being equal situation. What would have happened if we'd not made that decision in a seat like Sydney and Melbourne and Grayndler, where we were under pressure from the Greens? What would have happened in those seats? Otherwise, I don't know the answer to that question, and we never will.
Nick Minchin?
Kerry, at this stage it looks as though with 38% of the vote counted, there's a swing to the coalition of 1.4%, which is an extraordinary feat for Prime Minister John Howard, who clearly will be re-elected Prime Minister tonight. At his 4th election, we've got a swing to the government. This is almost unprecedented. And indeed, Mark Latham clearly is doing worse than Kim Beazley did at the last election, which must make the Labor Party wonder why they went to Mark Latham.
Well, I think it's a good time to actually step back and get some overview following what Nick Minchin was saying about the national vote. We might start by looking at our scoreboard graphic and the primary count, where you see that the combined primary vote of Liberal and National is nearly 47%. Labor's primary vote languishing at less than 38%, with a swing of a very slight swing away. The Greens 7.2%, and in terms of seats won and lost, you look at the combined Liberal National seats gained, the 72 there, 50 to Labor, and if we take a look now at the national trends, and you see that the swing to the Liberal Party with 40% of the vote counted, 3.2%. Labor, that slight swing away, slight swing to the Greens. The Democrats a big loser, and you see that One Nation, that 3.2% that One Nation had at the last election, which is pretty much translated directly to the Liberals. Now, Anthony, we might look at the chamber graphic and its predictions.
Well, we're seeing at this stage that the Labor Party, and, well, let's just fill in the figures here, we'll bring it on. We've saying the Liberals have definitely will win 60, the Nationals 12, Labor 51, with 3 others. They're the seats we're definitely giving away. We've got a couple more to add, which are leaning one way, and that takes the Liberals up to 64 and the Nationals 12. And at this stage, that's 76 seats. That's already a majority. If we take it one step further to a prediction, we're predicting 85 seats overall, a coalition majority of 20. That's an increase of 2 seats for the coalition. Now, we still have some Western Australian figures to come, but that's sort of indicating the sort of figure we're going to see by the end of the night.
Well, Bob McMullen, that's, I mean, if that prediction is sound...
I didn't hear, I was checking something else, I didn't quite hear the numbers, but
net loss of 2 seats.
Yeah, that could be right. It seems to me that the figures overall, with more than 20% of the national vote counted, are showing a swing against us. Nick said 1.9. Actually, to be frank, I think it's slightly worse than that.
Yeah, 3.2.
No, well, I don't think it's as bad as that. But nevertheless, any swing against us from an election you lose, and particularly the election we lost in the controversial circumstance of 2001, any swing against you is something that you have to swallow pretty hard to take. So that's where we are.
Just reflecting for a minute, what do you think was the biggest crunch issue of perhaps the combination, dare I suggest it, of the scare campaign on interest rates combined with the fact of Mark Latham's relative inexperience in a top job?
Well, yes, I think the interest rate issue entirely unjustifiably. I mean, it was one of the great lies of modern politics, but that doesn't matter. It's useless to say that it worked, you know, so we just live with the consequences of that.
But just on that point, if you accept that it was a scare campaign, then you have to acknowledge that there was a failure by Labor to adequately deal with it.
Well, I think we did everything one could to deal with it, but it didn't work, you know, and that's a reality with which we have to live, as is the fact that for a new leader, 10 months is not a long time. I thought he did a great job. I have no qualms. I don't go changing my view after the results come in from the one I had before. I said before the results came in, I thought Mark did a good job, and I thought the National Secretariat of the party did a good job in running the campaign. That remains my view. I think both sides ran a pretty good professional campaign. Obviously, I have some disagreement about the way some issues were presented, but by the coalition, which I've already said. But in terms of the competence with which they were conducted, I thought they were both pretty good. and I thought both the leaders campaigned pretty well. So we have to look at ourselves and see why the result is so bad, and hope that in Western Australia our colleagues can hang on.
And Nick mentioned, now that you do have the spoils of victory, I guess you've got to hope and pray that interest rates don't go up in the next 3 months, because then you're going to have some explaining to do to the electorate.
Well, our case was always that interest rates would almost certainly be higher under Labor than under us. We weren't forecasting particular movements in rates, simply that based on Labor policy, Labor's track record, the public had a reason to expect they'd be higher under Labor than under us.
But you're, starting to stretch it, aren't you? I mean, are you still going to be making that argument in 3 years' time?
Well, hang on a minute, Kerry. We'll fight the next election in 3 years' time, Kerry, not tonight.
But at what point is it no longer valid for you to hold a new leader responsible for something that happened 15 years ago?
Well, our main argument was on the Labor Party policy. Their industrial relations policy was clearly inflationary, which would drive up interest rates. But can I say in relation to Labor's strategy, I think their failure was not to address this issue of economic competence much earlier in Mark Latham's leadership. It was clearly their big weakness. Mark Latham didn't talk about the economy until the election really started, and then, even then, not till the final week. If I was a Labor strategist, I would have said you've got to deal with this issue of economic competence very early on in the piece, and I think they failed to do that.
Now, of course, one of the big elements of this campaign that everybody was focusing on was the issue of the Green vote, with the collapse of the Democrat vote that was expected after the mess they walked themselves into over their leadership, and some of those issues that played to the Greens. There was an anticipation that the Greens may well have built themselves to the point where they could help deliver government to Labor. Now, obviously, that hasn't happened. Anthony, what can you tell us about the picture of the Green vote?
Well, we're going to do two things. First, going to look at the Green vote state by state to see how that's broken down across the country. You can see they've got, of course, no figures from Western Australia at this stage, which is 8.3 in New South Wales, 7.3 in Victoria, 5% in Queensland, a bit over 5 in South Australia, Tasmania 9.5, the ACT 10.5. The next thing we'll look at is actually the change in vote that's occurred in each of those areas. As you can see, it's up 3.5 in New South Wales, not up as much as Victoria and Queensland, but it's definitely up in every state, as you can see there on that graphic.
But interestingly, if you look at Tasmania, up 1.7%, but in the process, 2 seats have been lost by the Labor Party.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk of Green preferences and whether they could deliver. The problem at this election for the Labor Party is not lower Green preferences, it's the fact that primary vote is too low. You can't win elections if you've got a low primary vote.
And we cross now to Bob Brown, looking very pleased. Bob Brown in Tasmania. Certainly, I'm not sure quite where you are. I'm assuming Hobart. Those
right.
that respectable primary vote there, more than respectable. Are you pleased?
Yeah, it's a great primary vote right across the country. The Greens are polling above our last vote, which itself was a record vote. And Tasmania is showing that will translate into a much bigger vote in the Senate. So we're looking very strong in the Senate. In Tasmania, the vote's up right across the state. But in the Senate, it's looking extraordinarily good with 1/3 of the vote in, and I'm feeling very happy about that indeed. While the Liberals have picked up, I think, 2 seats in Tasmania, they've still just got 42% of the vote. So far from a good vote as far as the forests are concerned. The majority of Tasmanians have voted to protect the forest against John Howard's policies.
Yes, but arguably, Bob Brown, the Liberals' forest policy has helped re-elect John Howard.
No, it hasn't, because the polling in Tasmania was showing, before both packages came out, that the Liberals would pick up 3 seats. They've only got 2 seats. The vote has not improved on that. In fact, it's gone backwards. And there has been a strengthening of the vote for the Greens. Maxine, on 36% of the vote counted, Christine Milne is now moved to 14.4%. That's above a quota. She's rating above my vote last time, and she will win the 4th or 5th Senate seat in Tasmania.
I can see the Christine Milne posters there. Bob, what about, though, the House of Representatives, where Michael Organ, of course, is the only Green member there in the House of Reps? What are you hearing from Cunningham and his abilities to hang on to that seat, which, of course, he got from the Labor Party in a by-election?
A tough call there, because the Liberals are 4 or 5% up on the Greens. Michael's rating at about 22, 23%. But a long way to go with that count yet, so Michael's still well in that race. and it will depend a bit on the preferences from the smaller parties. The Greens are also rating above 20% in Sydney and in Melbourne. In Melbourne, it looks like we'll be second after Lindsay Tanner looks like he'll hold that seat. And remarkably, in the seat of Bennelong, Andrew Wilkie has moved the Green vote up by 13% and he's over 17%. That's quite a remarkable vote there, and it looks like, to me, John Howard's risking being forced to preferences.
Just, we'll wait and see about them, but just finally and just quickly, are you surprised? I mean, obviously a strong Green preference to the Labor Party tonight, but as Anthony Green just said before, a poor primary vote for the Labor Party. Does this surprise you?
Yeah, no, well, it's pretty tough going because if that keeps going, then Mr Howard will be back in for a fourth term, and that's not the Australia that we Greens are working to see. So it'll be commiserations for Labor if that's the case, but I think commiseration for the country. The Greens, however, are a values party. We're new, of course, and Australians have taken a great liking to us despite an extraordinary vilification campaign, including from the Prime Minister. Australians knew better than that and they've voted Green tonight.
Okay. Bob Brown, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Maxine.
Kerry.
Thank you.
Bob Brown might be smiling, but the Labor Party isn't. And there's an interesting story being played out in South Australia, a state that was going to originally to be strong for Labor, but it looks like something each way here. Can we start by looking at the seat of Hindmarsh? This is one of the Liberal marginals that Labor had hoped to win. Anthony Green?
Yeah, well, it's always a bit harder for a party to... Remember, at last election, the only seat Labor won was one without a sitting member. When you don't have a sitting member, the parties don't get to spend all the taxpayers' money on their mail-out, so they have to actually pay for that themselves, which makes it much harder for the parties. I'm being very cynical, and it's my political statement for the night. But the Labor Party is behind on the primaries on those raw votes, but we're factoring in the preferences from 14 of 46 booths, and that's translating into a 1.9% swing, which is putting Labor slightly ahead, we're predicting at this stage, but not enough to call the seat at this stage.
OK, and the seat of Adelaide, this is Trish Worth's seat, held with a margin of 1%.
Well, Trish Worth is a sitting member, so no doubt has had all the money to flood the electorate with mail, and so she's behind slightly on the primaries at this stage. We've got just under half the vote counted. Labor's slightly ahead. We factor in those booths, those preferences that we've got in 23 of the 58 booths. It's translating into 1.4%, which is in doubt. I'd note that Trish Worth was behind on the vote on election night last time and turned it round by 0.8 on the postals and absence.
And in fact, there is a huge postal vote factor in this.
50%. So I think seats like this, I think we won't know till next week.
That's right.
OK, the seat of Macon, that is the third, the trifecta seat, if you like, in South Australia that Labor had hoped for. This is Trish Draper's seat. She held this again with a slender margin.
And she's currently slightly ahead, 4 votes there on the primary votes. Well, slightly more, actually, miscounted there. 304. She's ahead on the primaries, and when we look at the booths, we still have no preference counts on this one, so I wouldn't be at all prepared to call that one. That's definitely in doubt. We've got 13 primary vote booths and no preferences. I suspect there's a lot of scrutineering going on in there.
Family First are outpolling the Greens in this seat, and of course Family First preferences are flowing to...
They got over 6% in that electorate, the state election.
And this was always going to be their strongest
That's right,
state.
that's right, but it's coming through in the numbers. So Trish, I think, will hang on.
OK, now here's the wildcard seat in South Australia, the seat of Kingston, with the sitting Labor member David Cox, with a margin that certainly this was a seat that even Nick Minchin was surprised to see the figures on. Anthony?
Well, I'd wait. 10 of 37, there's a swing of 2.3% after the distribution of preferences. We've got a comparison of booths and a preference count in 10 of 37 booths. At this stage is indicating 2.3%, no, too close to call. So that one's...
This is a real turn-up, Kerry, for us to be ahead at this point in Kingston. Labor's only shadow minister in South Australia, and it was always a real outside chance for us, but on these figures, Labor might well lose this seat.
OK, now earlier in the night you were sounding quite hopeful about the seat of Wakefield. How's that looking now, Anthony?
Well, we now have a preference count in 33 of the 57 booths. Martin Evans is ahead on the primary votes. It's a 5.5% vote there for Family First, so as opposed to the Greens. The Greens are not strong in South Australia, it must be said. And also in outer suburban seats, the Greens are not nearly as strong in the other parts of the state. 2.5% swing to the Liberals. It's saying a Liberal gain at this stage. I would be cautious in that electorate. It does have two completely opposite ends. And the Liberals have never really campaigned in the Elizabeth end, and Labor's never really campaigned in the Clare and Gilbert Valley. So
the word I'm getting from those Elizabeth areas, the old Benithan booths, is that we're picking up, 5 to 7% swings in those Labor booths.
I'm always prepared to wait.
It's going to be interesting taking a line up from South Australia. It's going to be interesting to see the figures from Solomon, which I hope we'll bring up shortly. But can we look at the seat of Gippsland in Victoria? This is the seat held by Peter McGoran for the National Party, with again a slender margin, about 2.6%.
Well, there's always a bit of excitement after the last redistribution because Peter McGoran had his margin reduced from 8% to 2.6%. And there was some talk that he could lose the seat. I suspect there's a candidate there, Peter Kelly, who's an independent, was an anti-logging, pro-logging candidate. I suspect this is one seat on the mainland where the Tasmanian forestry decision might have had an impact. There's a lot of forestry in Gippsland, and it's a 5.7% swing to the National Party, and Peter McGoran's got his margin back.
And in fact, we're crossing now to Peter McGoran in the heartland of Gippsland. Peter McGoran, on those figures, a big swing to you, and I'm told nationally, in fact, the National Party vote is up to around 7%, much better than your 2001 result. Have you heard from John Anderson yet? Has he called to say you're magnificent?
No, but I'll be speaking to John before too much longer.
What do you think has happened, particularly in your seat, to really improve this National Party vote?
Look, it's the work of 8 years in government. It's a cumulative total of the National Party's work is finally registering our solid achievements, our track record. Now, incumbency is a two-edged sword, of course, because on the one hand, you've got all the advantages of incumbency, but on the other hand, people expect a lot more from you, and we've delivered, and finally, I think it's registering.
What has been the impact of, say, the announcement in the rival announcements by both leaders to do with forest policies coming out of Tasmania? What impact, if any, has that had, say, in your electorate?
It may not have translated into actual votes for the Timber Independent. The great importance in Gippsland and why it was such a sea change almost in the final week was the impression it had on everybody else in the electorate that John Howard stuck with blue-collar workers and timber communities and didn't betray them. So it was the most cut-through imagery of the entire campaign, and it was its broader effect that has translated into votes, I believe.
All right. Peter McGoran, for that, thanks very much and congratulations.
Thank you.
Michael, coming to you now, you've got a broader National Party story. Just give that to us.
Yeah, look, I think the Nationals story is really interesting. They were, it was a bit unpredictable which way the Nationals vote was going to go, wasn't it, Ron? It was possible it was going to keep trending down as it has for a while, but it's probably interesting to look back now. We've got a graph here that goes back to the very beginnings when it was the Country Party in 1919, and then under Earl Page in the 30s, was doing quite well at around 23%, and then of course it slumped a bit in the war years, started to build again under Black Jack McEwen up to 17%. Doug Anthony pretty much held that line, and then it started to fall off, and it fell off under Charles Blunt, and a gradual decline ever since until 2001 when the Nationals vote slipped to just under 6%. It's now up to 7.2%, and I think that's as they were saying, it's finally come through for them. I think in that way, the decline was trending down all the way for the Nats, and they've come back up again. I think it's interesting though. In some seats, we can look at a couple of seats here. One of the ones that they're in real trouble in is Richmond, and Larry Anthony there looks like he is in really big trouble. The 2.3% swing against him, and here the Green vote is 11.2%. So I think that's one of the things that's going to do it in for Larry Anthony in Richmond. And another interesting one, I think, is Kennedy, where Bob Catter, the former National, now Rebel Independent, has a swing towards him of 1.7%. But interesting, the Nationals votes up there too, about 10%. So a pretty good story overall, I would have thought, for the National Party.
Well, on the set with me now is Senator Ron Boswell, the Queensland National Senator. I mean, good news for you tonight on that national vote. As I say, much improved on your 2001 figures, but it hasn't translated into any seat gains, has it?
I don't think we've lost any seats. I think we're in very tight situation in Richmond, but we're always in tight situations in Richmond. whether we can pull it back on the postals. I know that he's done exceptional hard work on that.
Just on Richmond, Ron, what do you think has been happening there?
Well, we got hit.
Very high Green vote, obviously.
Well, we got hit with a dodgy Liberals for Forest how to vote card in the same colours as Liberal, handed out by people saying vote Liberal. Confused a lot of the older people. That's the campaign tricks that you've got to fight, and I think that may have some effect. But I certainly wouldn't write Richmond off as yet. We have the ability to bring some of these seats home.
The Nationals were confident in your own home state of getting Kennedy back from Bob Katter, but was that always a bit of a heroic hope?
Well, it was a campaign that we tried very hard. I think people in Kennedy voted with their hearts rather than their heads. Congratulations to Bob.
That's a bit unfair to Bob Katter, isn't it?
No, I think I think it's probably fair to Bob Katter because he's been there a long time. The family name's been there a long time. I congratulate him.
He did have a member of his own family come out against him, though, didn't he? He's done well, but we've pulled 10% back. Our vote has gone up 10%. Our candidate ran a magnificent campaign. But one of the overall things I believe in the campaign was that the Labor Party has a progressive element and it has a conservative working class element. And that wedge that John Howard hit them with on Thursday, it sent a message out to every blue-collar worker in Australia that, you're going to get sold out for the Green vote. And they may have picked up a bit on the progressives, but by gee, didn't it cost them plenty on their conservative blue-collar worker element. So are you saying that Labor should have seen this coming?
Well, it was the greatest sucker punch I've ever seen. I could see it. What imagery? All workers, blue-collar workers, standing up, cheering the Prime Minister, cheering him to the rafters. And, of course, that sends a signal out to every other blue-collar worker, hey, you're forgetting us. We're the core of your party. You've sold us out. And that was, I think, one of the decisive points of the whole campaign. And it was done so brilliantly well.
Nonetheless, what about in Queensland? What was your sense of the sentiment about Mark Latham as a new Labor leader?
Well, I was stuck in the very conservative seats, like Kennedy. It's always difficult to win those seats because Labor can't win them. They know they can't win them. They don't try particularly hard. In fact, they weren't even manning all their polling booths today. So their vote goes down. The Labor people then vote for Bob Katter, who was the independent, because they don't want to vote Conservative. So it's very tough in that. But my time in the campaign was spent in very conservative seats.
OK. Ron Boswell for that. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Kerry.
Thanks, Maxine. And we're going to take a look now for the first time at that highly marginal Conservative seat in Solomon, based around Darwin. Anthony Green, what's the story? I think 50% of the vote counted.
Well, Dave Tollner won this by just 88 votes at the last election. And he gets lampooned a bit in Canberra, but I think in Northern Australia, some of these MPs who are seen as a bit rustic in Canberra actually go down a real treat. We've seen that with Bob Katter. And so I think Dave Tollner has done quite well here. He's got 51% of the primary vote for the Country Liberal Party. And when we factor in the booths, we've got 16 of 24 booths. We're looking at a 2.7% swing to him. And it's a Country Liberal Party retain of, it says Lib there, but it's actually Country Liberal. We have to categorise him somehow. But Dave Tollner will be returned as a member of the coalition government.
Bob McMullen, I'm not rubbing salt into the wounds here, but Solomon was one of those seats that consistently you would hear Labor strategists say, this is one we think we're going to win.
Yes, I was one of those. I campaigned in it. A terrific candidate, Jim, and a very effective campaigner. And I couldn't tell what the campaign was like on the ground. I wasn't there long enough to know, but a quality candidate, and all the trends were right for us. And Claire Martin was a big plus for us up there, so we should have won the seat. I'm not criticising the locals. I think he's a terrific candidate, and I have a very high regard for him. But we should have won that seat, and the fact that we didn't. We got a very good result in Lingiari. Once again, another case where we built up our vote in the seats we already hold, but didn't build it up in the seats we wanted to win.
Well, let's look at the numbers in Lingiari. This is a seat held by Warren Snowden, a veteran Labor member from the Northern Territory. Anthony Green?
Warren Snowden's well ahead here. This is a seat where you've always got to know where the booths are from. a quarter of the votes cast at the mobile polling booths, and Labor absolutely swamps that vote. I'm not sure whether this is mobile polling booths or whether this is towns, but certainly when we compare which booths the figures are from, it's showing that there's a 2.8% swing to the Labor Party, and Warren Snowden will be comfortably returned in Lingiari.
OK, now we're going to go to North Queensland, and one of the most hotly contested seats in the country, the seat of Herbert, of course based around Townsville, military base there, a seat where the Prime Minister campaigned heavily. Mark Latham had a presence there as well. This seat was held marginally for the Liberal Party by Peter Lindsay.
Well, there's no contest here. Peter Lindsay's romping it in against Anita Phillips from the Labor Party, former state MP for the local seat of Thuringowa. I think it was Thuringowa. 49.5 for the Liberal Party. Hardly even needs preferences, but when you factor in the preferences and the count from 31 of the 44 booths, showing a 5% swing to the Liberal Party, and Herbert's gone back to the sort of margin it had when Peter Lindsay won it in 1996. OK, still in Queensland, but back down to Brisbane now. This is the new seat of Bonner in the last redistribution. Con Shaka was the sitting member in the adjoining seat of Bowman. He's moved across there, holding it on paper by a margin of 1.9%. Well, at this stage, he's ahead. He's ahead on the primary votes there. Vote for both the Greens and the Family First have popped up there, so their preferences are coming. And we have, after the distribution of preferences, there's a swing of 1.1% to the Liberal Party. It looks like the Labor Party is ahead, but we've got 27 of 40 booths. OK, now we were talking, Anthony, about the strong polling of Family First in South Australia, which I suppose you could say is its home state. But how is that vote performing around the country? Well, they didn't contest every seat, but if you look at some of the minor parties in terms of the average vote they get in the seats they contest, the Greens are averaging 7%. Democrats are averaging 1.4 and One Nation are averaging 2.3. Family First are averaging 2.7. So at their first election, they've certainly passed the Democrats and One Nation. But 2.7 means that in some seats where they have polled 5 and 6%, their preferences have been important.
Now, Nick mentioned, I know that Family First favours your side of politics, but I wonder how healthy it is for a party to be entering the political fray that is so strongly religious-based, particularly with that strong connection back to Assemblies of God.
Well, I think that's a bit rich, frankly, Kerry. This is a party that has Christian values, and they don't hide that. They're pro-family values, they're social conservatives. And I think that's, we had the DLP for years, which was essentially a Catholic party, essentially running on that sort of agenda. I'm satisfied this party is pluralist, secular, but it obviously does attract a lot of support from people who have deep Christian values. I'm surprised the way the Australian media has suddenly thought there's something insidious about this. That's frankly rather, I'm not accusing you of that, but it is rather odd, the commentary on Family First, that a party that has a Christian-based set of values is something to be, surprised about. I think it's perfectly healthy in a democracy to have a party reflecting...
I suppose there's this quaint theory that religion and politics are supposed to be separate.
Well, it's not the Christian Democrats, it's not Fred Niles' party, it's the Family First party, and I've got to know them. They are a South Australian-based party. Interesting that the Democrats effectively started in South Australia, and Family First has started in South Australia. It's an interesting cradle for political parties, but they are primarily driven by family values. And while a lot of their members do attend church regularly, I think the media ought to back off and let this party grow and develop.
Well, we're about to hear a little more of them, Maxine.
Thanks, Kerry. We're going to Andrea Mason now, who's the Family First Senate candidate in South Australia. Andrea Mason, you've been tuning in. Clearly a very, very positive result for a first-time party. Anthony Green said there it surpassed the Democrats and One Nation. Why do you think you've been so successful first time round?
It's very pleasing to see the results coming in now. We can see that Australia is deciding that they want to have a family-friendly parliament, and Family First is part of this new wave of parties wanting to really promote family policies in our federal parliament, and that's pleasing for us that we're part of this new wave of change.
What will a family-friendly parliament look like to you?
Well, no doubt in the Senate we want to have as many Family First senators up there, being part of the debate, being part of influence, and looking at legislation that is going to be positive for families.
Of what type, though? I mean, what with let's say you get the expected 3% of the vote tonight. What kind of reform legislation would you be looking for from the Howard government in exchange for that kind of vote?
Well, certainly we've been talking strongly about child protection and looking at the government calling a Royal Commission into child abuse. And these are issues that we've taken up here in South Australia, and we believe that these are issues that are really important in terms of the federal parliament.
It's interesting, of course, when one looks around the country tonight. I mean, we've already seen the success of Michael Ferguson in the seat of Bass. He's a man who espouses Christian values. Possibly we may see the success of Louise Marcos tonight in the seat of Greenway in New South Wales. What do you put down? What do you put down this trend towards the kind of candidates that clearly you represent?
Well, certainly that shows that there is a dissatisfaction of a parliament not representing a large group in the community, that is those with Judeo-Christian ethics. And we are a party that has that foundation. And clearly Australians are saying we want to have that level of representation and that foundation in terms of policy formation. And that's a positive thing for our party to know here on October the 9th, because it gives us a strong sense of what we need to be doing in the next few weeks ahead.
Okay. All right, Andrew Mason, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bob McMullen, when we were talking earlier about Mark Latham's leadership through this campaign, and Nick Minchin did raise the question, tongue-in-cheek or not, I'm not sure, but he did raise the question that given that you've, on the national vote at this stage, you've gone back slightly, he wonders, in fact, no different to 98, right? Or Kim Beazley's performance in 98.
Well, they're doing worse than Kim in 2001.
Worse than Kim Beazley in 2001. Why the change?
Oh, well,
now, I know what you've said about Mark Latham, but...
No, I'm not going to... You won't hear a word of criticism of Mark from me. Everybody knows I voted for Kim, but I found Mark a very good leader both inside the party and in public. He worked well with the party, he led it well, he was bold in policy, and...
But was it perhaps too long to get Kim Beazley back into the fold on that front bench, playing a prominent role as he ultimately did?
Well, I don't think that was our problem. I think the national security issue, which Kim's coming back helped us negate, didn't, I don't think, hurt us at all in the election. I thought that was actually handled very well. I think the issue was that the big scare campaign on interest rates, totally without foundation, but that's beside the point. As I say, you can argue the merits tomorrow. Tonight you have to say the scare campaign worked. I think it doesn't say good things about the way our political system is operating at the moment, but there's no point complaining. You run in a democracy, you lose, you just take it on the chin.
Well, the big man himself is standing by in his seat of Brand in Western Australia with Maxine McHugh.
Kim Beazley, is this the train wreck that some of your supporters predicted would happen tonight?
Certainly not. I've got to tell you, I've been dreading this night for the last 12 months. Because 12 months ago, when I looked at our polling, and I did have access to our polling, maybe I shouldn't have, we stood to lose 25 to 30 seats. So I regard every seat we have above minus 25 as a stay of execution and a terrific gain. We looked like, at the end of last year, going out to a defeat, or going down to a defeat at least as bad as the defeat in 96. Now, from what I can see tonight, though it's not a happy result for us and there's no victory at all, it is nevertheless a better result than that, and a result that still leaves us within a position to, though we haven't seen West Australia yet, I admit that, but it still leaves us, so it seems, in a position to have a good strike at it next time.
But that's small consolation. I mean, this is a worse result, as we're hearing, than 2001. You yourself are on the record as saying that the Howard government has wasted its third term. What on earth happened?
Well, you heard what I had to say just then. And the reasons we had that argument over leadership in the Labor Party over 12 months ago. We didn't have that argument because we considered ourselves poised for victory. We had that argument back then because we considered ourselves poised for utter destruction. Now, that is, you've got to be... I'm an old politician and I've been in this game a long time. And I think I've got clear eyes and reasonably approximate to 20/20 vision. And you can see, you can see objectively the state of play in politics. Mark Latham has, leadership position in the Labor Party, pulled us back from what looked like utter disaster towards the end of last year. Now, we haven't won. It's been his first outing. We haven't won. But we're still in a position where we're within striking distance. As I say, I put a caveat round that in relation to Western Australia. I don't know what the result will be here.
Kim Beazley, is there any flicker in your heart tonight that had you been leader, you could have done better?
No. Look, that is absolute speculation and not even worth worrying about. And there's no flickers in my heart except that those flickers that are related to the high level of probability of the survival of a contestable Labor Party. And all our campaign workers around this country ought to feel enormously proud of that achievement. They've been in the fight of their lives over not just the last 6 weeks, over the last 12 months, and we seem to have, at this stage anyway, to have come through it.
Well, come through it? I mean, what are the questions do you think that are going to be asked from whether it's midnight tonight, tomorrow morning or Monday about Mark Latham's leadership?
Look at the facts of the matter. The facts of the matter are these. Courtesy of the Hawke and Keating governments, we've got a good economy. Now, Howard was prepared to say that a few years ago. He hasn't been saying it recently. You've got a good economy out there operating, people feeling secure. You had one of those massive Liberal negative campaigns around a lie on interest rates. It was a lie, but when you've got people up to their necks in debt, which you do have around the country now, and I found it in my own constituency, I could tell in those areas of my constituency that are mortgage belt, that sort of that somewhat sullen look that you get from voters who avert their gaze from you as they go in to vote, and when they come out and wish you well, you can see it's a sort of sorry mate, I had to do that to you type of response. They took things very seriously, and that interest rate lie really resonated. Howard is very good at that. He's tactically poor in an election campaign, but strategically clever in the way he gets a policy setting.
But Kim
he got the
Beazley,
lie up early and we never answered it.
Kim Beazley, in saying that, is Labor just missing the obvious point? Australian voters did not accept that this was a lie. Somewhere in the minds of many Australian voters was the view that in fact John Howard is a far better manager of the Australian economy, and that covers interest rates and everything else.
Well, there's no point debating the election, Maxine. The election's over, gone, finished. We'll have to do an analysis of that. But what did the Labor Party do to meet that particular challenge in this election campaign? What it did was to say, insofar as interest rates are impacted on by government outlays and revenue, expenditures and revenue, we needed to be better in relation to the surplus than our political opponents. So we made substantial savings in the offerings we put forward. We ended up in that position, but nevertheless it was insufficient to get ourselves into a situation where we could win, but it may have been sufficient to get ourselves into a situation where we didn't confront the minus 25 to 30 figure that our polling told us we were going to cop about 12 months ago.
All right. Kim Beazley, for joining us tonight, thank you very much indeed. We look forward to the post-mortems ahead.
I don't, but good to be with you.
Thanks, Kim.
All living